Chapter 1541. At 9:00 in the morning, the hot air balloons began to take off. One after another, the bombers, filled with black oil, began to move in the direction of Lahore. On the city gate tower, a group of Kiliarks followed by Sinjar. They were currently patrolling the city gate tower. In Sinjar's eyes, this first battle was especially important. Whether or not they could suppress the arrogance of the five-star army would determine whether or not they could take the initiative in the next battle and defend the important city of Lahore. "Look, what's that? In the sky, above our heads, what's that? Oh my God, that thing can move, and it's floating over our heads. Is that an immortal?" When the hot air balloons appeared in the sky above Lahore, there were all sorts of shouts from the Sudanese who discovered all this. Due to the close distance and the influence of the Han culture, the appearance of these hot air balloons made many people mistakenly believe that an immortal had appeared. At this time, Sinjar also looked up at everything in the sky at this time with a puzzled look in his eyes. The Air Force had only been used against the Golden Horde and the Ross Duchy before. Because the distance between the two sides was too far, this matter had not reached Sinjar's ears. At this moment, he only looked at the sky curiously, not knowing what exactly it was. But instinctively, Sinjar felt that this thing was somewhat dangerous. It didn't matter if he didn't know. Division Commander Sun Lixing would soon let them know the power of this thing. When most of the hot air balloons reached the designated position, the flag bearer beside him put down the red flag in his hand, indicating that they could freely attack. The Air Force soldiers, who had been impatient for a long time, immediately threw wooden barrels from the hot air balloons onto the ground one after another. At this time, looking from the ground at this time, it really looked like the bombers of the future dropping bombs. After the wooden barrels were thrown down from the sky, lit matches were also thrown down from the sky one after another. In the face of all this, the Sudanese in the city still looked at all this with puzzlement. In their eyes, the lethality of the wooden barrels was extremely limited. They were too small in size and had low damage. They were even more threatening than the primitive catapults. Of course, this perception would soon be overturned. When the wooden barrel fell to the ground, a large amount of black liquid flowed out. When the fire starter fell to the ground, both sides quickly fused together to form huge balls of flames. That kind of scorching feeling, that kind of destructive power began to be astonishingly revealed. The black oil that could not be extinguished with water grew bigger and bigger, incinerating everything it came into contact with. As more and more houses and even some granaries containing military rations were set ablaze, Sinjar and the Sudanese soldiers in the city began to panic. For the sake of the mission, they could see the people's houses being destroyed, and they could also see the people being burned to death right in front of them. Even if it was war, would there always be sacrifices? However, when they saw that even the rations were destroyed, their expressions changed drastically. Without food, it was the same as having no food. How could people defend the city without eating? Put out the fire, quick! More and more soldiers were pouring water onto the black oil with all kinds of containers. Not only did the water not extinguish the fire, it only made the fire burn even more fiercely. This kind of scene that completely overturned everyone's perception made Sinjar feel a sense of helplessness in his heart. Originally, he wanted to have a good fight with the five-star army and see how powerful the enemy's cannons were. But now, there was no need for the five-star army to do anything. This fire had completely destroyed the city. Not only were their belongings destroyed, but even their fighting spirit was burned away. He could not wait any longer. Otherwise, he would not be defending the city. He would die here with the city. The 60,000 soldiers in his hands were the most powerful force in the Sultanate. Once the country was lost, Sinjar decided to sacrifice the soldiers to protect the general. He did not want to defend the city anymore. He wanted to rush out and retreat to the capital city of Delhi to rebuild the defense line there. After deciding to abandon the city, Sinjar ordered the generals under him, retreat immediately. Take whatever you can and prepare quickly. The generals, whose fighting spirit had long been burned away by the fire, did not object when they heard the military order. Everyone dispersed and began to assemble their own armies, preparing to choose the nearest city and charge out. Considering that the outside of the city was already surrounded by the 5-star army, no one knew which was the safest. Sinjar simply did not arrange a path for everyone to rush out. He wanted to see if the 5-star army could stop them. How many people could they stop? It's about time. Everyone, get ready. The soldiers of the 5-star army who were guarding the 4 cities saw the raging fire in Lahore and began to prepare to prevent the enemy from rushing out. Yang Qindong's arrangement was very simple. Under the premise that they did not know which city gate the enemy would rush out from, he divided the 2 divisions of Cold Vanguard into 4 groups. There were at least 2 Cold Vanguard regiments in front of each city gate. Behind them were cavalry soldiers with sabers in their hands. As long as the Cold Vanguard soldiers used their muskets to scare the enemy, the cavalry soldiers would rush out to capture the captives. With the Cold Vanguard soldiers as the vanguard, Yang Qindong was not worried that the enemy would rush out. He had already asked around. Among the 60,000 Sudanese soldiers, there were only 10,000 cavalry soldiers. The rest were infantrymen. Infantrymen did not have the ability to move quickly. As for the 10,000 cavalry soldiers, if they really rushed out, the 2,000 black cavalry soldiers beside him would teach them a lesson. At this point, Beta Persei had already prepared with Chiu V, Dao Xiao, Ba Daojiang, and the others. Yang Qindong was sure to take down the 60,000 Sudanese soldiers. The only difference was how many captives they could capture in the end. Sinjar, who was completely unaware of this, was already preparing to rush out of the south gate with 10,000 cavalry soldiers. The reason why he chose the south gate was intentional. If he had to choose to return to the capital, the east gate was undoubtedly the closest. However, he did not choose it because he wanted to catch the 5-star army off guard. As long as he rushed out of the city, he would only need to adjust his direction slightly to turn east and rush back to the capital. With 10,000 cavalry soldiers, he rushed out while the fire was still burning in the city. When the southern city gates suddenly opened, the eyes of 2nd Division Ling Feng, who was guarding here, lit up. The reason he was guarding the south gate was because he was taking a gamble. Even the 6th young master did not know about the enemy's plan to break out. Who else could? Picking a random gate to guard was mostly a matter of luck. Xiao Feng's eyes lit up when he saw more and more cavalrymen running out of the gates. He knew that there were only 10,000 cavalrymen in the city. Now that he had caught such a big fish, how could he not be happy? Everyone, get ready for battle. Machine Gun Company, prepare enough bullets. Don't be afraid of wasting bullets. Immediately send someone to report to the 6th young master that the enemy cavalry has appeared at the south gate. Quick! Xiao Feng continuously gave out orders. He also walked to the front of a heavy machine gun and placed his finger on the trigger. He was ready to enjoy himself. Among the cavalry soldiers, Sinclair was completely unaware of all this. Even though he saw the 5-star army when he opened the gate, he did not hesitate to give the order to attack. Since there were 5-star army outside the 4 cities, he just had to choose the enemy in front of him to attack. Charge! 10,000 cavalrymen poured out of the city gate, forming a huge aura. It was said that more than 10,000 soldiers were boundless. When these 10,000 cavalrymen formed a line and overlapped each other, the impression they gave off could be described as majestic. If it was a timid person, not to mention counterattacking, it would already be considered good if they could stand there without trembling. However, when the same formation was placed in front of the experienced soldiers of the Cold Vanguard, it was like a child's play. They did not forget that the 6th young master led 2,000 black cavalry soldiers and defeated 100,000 Baiming Liaodong heavy cavalry soldiers. That was what the Cold Vanguard soldiers should have done. After that incident, many people were envious of them. If the 6th young master could defeat 100,000 cavalry soldiers with 2,000 soldiers, wouldn't it be too easy for them to defeat 10,000 soldiers with 4,000 soldiers? Therefore, none of the soldiers showed any fear when facing the enemy cavalry. On the contrary, they were all filled with battle intent. They only felt that the enemy had sent too few cavalry soldiers. As the commander, Xiao Feng was also very excited. When he saw that the enemy cavalry had all left the city and started charging, he shouted to the messenger beside him, "Order the artillery battalion to fire. Scatter the cannons and fire 2 shots at the front. Disrupt the cavalry formation." The reason why cavalry had a crushing advantage against infantry soldiers was because of their collective charging formation. With the advantage of speed and endless charging force, there were very few infantry soldiers who could resist them. The purpose of the cannons was to disrupt the enemy's formation and suppress the advantage of cavalry soldiers to the lowest point. When that happened, they could do whatever they wanted. After receiving the order, the messenger quickly turned around and ran. The artillery battalion had already taken out the cannons from the wooden boxes and were waiting for the order to fire. On the other hand, the 10,000 cavalrymen led by Sinclair were still clueless. They continued to charge forward using the most primitive method. Chapter 1542. Especially after they were 2 li away from the city gate, they were already very close to the 5-star army. However, when they still couldn't see the enemy cavalry charging out, Sinjar couldn't help but reveal a joyful expression. The distance was too close. Even if the 5-star army cavalry charged, they wouldn't have the advantage of speed. At that time, he would have the complete upper hand. Just as he was sighing in his heart that the 5-star army was only so, a flash of fire suddenly appeared in Sinjar's eyes. Just as he instinctively felt that something was wrong, a cannonball landed a few dozen meters away from him. The cavalry at that location immediately let out a burst of cries and howls. Let's not talk about the place where the cannonballs landed and the cavalrymen were blown away. When the nearby cavalrymen heard the loud rumbling sound, they all went crazy. Under the fear, they didn't listen to their master's orders. Instead, they ran around and threw the cavalrymen on their backs off their horses. The cannonball was so loud that it caused the horses to run around like headless flies. There was no need for the 5-star army to do anything. The Sudanese cavalry that was originally in formation was already in chaos. The chaos in the formation greatly exceeded Sinjar's expectations. He originally wanted to charge out, but he couldn't help but slow down. After he realized that something was wrong, he didn't have a better idea. They had already charged out. Could it be that they had to retreat back into the city? The city was currently on fire. If they stayed there, the city would be breached sooner or later. Rather than that, they might as well give it a try. Everyone, don't be afraid. Continue to charge. As long as we charge out, we will live. He shouted loudly to boost the morale of the army. This shout finally stopped the chaos in the cavalry. Of course, the most important thing was that the cannonballs had already been fired. After the cannonballs stopped, the cavalry seemed to have regained their spirit. When they saw that the 5-star army was less than 2 li away from them, in order to survive, they mustered up their courage and ran forward with all their might. Don't be in a hurry. Fire after 300 meters. Seeing that the enemy cavalry was no longer as imposing as before, Commander Xiao Feng felt even more confident. He chuckled and spoke unhurriedly. The effective range of the 95 style was around 400 to 500 paces. If the wind was blowing, it was possible to hit further away. At 300 paces away, anyone who was hit by a bullet would be severely injured, if not killed instantly. The 2 regiments of Cold Vanguard were not in a hurry, but the Sudanese cavalry were excited. They thought that the 5-star army was at their wits' end, and they charged forward bravely with the desire to live. Quick, there are less than 500 steps left. Victory is right in front of us, ha ha ha. Protected by his bodyguards, Single, who was riding on his horse, returned to his usual self of strategizing. His experience on the battlefield told him that at such a close distance, even the 5-star army's cavalry would be restrained by him. He could almost see victory waving at him. 450 steps. 400 steps. 350 steps. 300 steps. Fire! When they were 300 paces away, Commander Xiao Feng's voice thundered. The cold vanguard soldiers who had been waiting impatiently for a long time were waiting for this order. The light and heavy machine guns, coupled with the 95-style rapid fire, rained down on the Sudanese cavalry, causing them to fall to the ground one after another. Under the dense barrage of bullets, no one could break through this layer of obstruction and take a step forward. When the bullets hit a person or a horse, the Sudanese cavalry fully understood the principle of courting death by charging forward bravely. Unfortunately, it was courting death. Whoever charged faster would die faster. Under the indiscriminate barrage of bullets, no cavalry could charge within 250 paces, let alone injure the enemy. Seeing batch after batch, at least half of the cavalry died in the charge, the remaining Sudanese cavalry finally had a drastic change in expression. Without waiting for orders, they turned around and fled. In the face of this blockade of death, no one would be able to remain calm. Single's luck was not bad, perhaps because he did not charge at the front, but he survived. However, there were times when being alive was far more unbearable than being dead. Just like the current him, seeing the cavalry under his command fall down wave after wave as if they were cut chives, and then no one was able to stand up again, he was truly scared silly. He had seen the power of firearms before, but they were usually limited to short range, and reloading was very troublesome. Facing the charge of the cavalry, they could only launch one wave of attacks. Needless to say, the accuracy of the attacks was even worse. For the elite cavalry, the lethality of the attacks was very limited. Although they couldn't be ignored, the attacks wouldn't affect the cavalry's charge. They would only cause a certain amount of damage to the formation of the infantry. Unlike the firearms in the hands of the 5-star army, they were really good at reaping lives. The bullets seemed to be endless, the faster the cavalry charged, the more they died. This was an undefeatable enemy. Single finally understood why the Khanate alliance, which had a total of 1 million men, was defeated by the 5-star army, which only had a few 100,000 men. The more he thought about it, the more afraid he became. This nightmare was finally his turn. How could he defeat such an opponent? It seemed like the only choice was to escape. Single was terrified. He led his cavalry of less than 5,000 and turned to flee. They wanted to get out of the firing range of the muskets. As for where to go next, they would not wait for death here. It's finally our turn, right? Charge! The commander of the Mabe division, Xin Honghai, had been waiting for a long time. Seeing the enemy cavalry start to flee, about to escape the firing range of the guns, he laughed and led the cavalry of the Mabe division to charge. Along with them were 10,000 cavalry from Meng 3 division. Although their division commander Chiwen was not in the direction of the south gate, the leading general still shouted and charged after Mabe division. This scene was seen by Beta Persei from afar. At this time, there were 1,000 fully armed black cavalry behind him. Fuck, who ordered them to charge? Hurry, hurry, or we won't even get to drink soup. Beta Persei was anxious. He rushed over as soon as he heard the enemy cavalry rushing out from the south gate, but it seemed like he was still one step too late. Charge! There were firearms waiting to reap his life. Run! There were countless 5-star army chasing after him, also waiting to reap his life. Seeing that he would die no matter what, Single, who didn't want to die, rolled his eyes and made a very unmanly decision. That was to dismount and surrender. No one was willing to surrender, but after seeing the air force and powerful firearms of the 5-star army, the pride in Single's heart had long been destroyed. After knowing that he would die if he continued to fight, he wisely chose to surrender. Although it would not look good on his face, it was better to live than to die. Only by living could people have the right to talk about everything. Even their commander, Sinclair, had taken the initiative to surrender. How could the soldiers under him still care about their reputation? They immediately got off their horses and knelt down to surrender, causing the 5-star army cavalry to feel as though they were punching cotton. All of this happened to be seen by young heir who was chasing after them. He immediately laughed out loud and thought to himself, "Who told you to not wait for me, your second brother? Great, now you won't have the chance to kill people anymore, right? The enemies at the south gate had all surrendered except for those who died in battle. They were not the first to choose to surrender, nor were they the first to end the battle. The progress at the east gate was faster than them. They were all infantrymen, and they were first attacked by artillery. Many of them were already scared out of their wits. Then, when they finally reached 300 steps in front of the 5-star army, the scene of firearms firing swallowed their last bit of courage. At that time, when the 5-star army cavalry charged, there was no other choice but to surrender. This battle lasted from 9 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon. From the beginning to the end, it was only 6 hours. More than 20,000 of the 60,000 Sudanese soldiers were killed, and more than 30,000 of them surrendered. The battle ended so quickly that the Sudanese people in the city lost all hope. For a time, many people rushed out of the city gate. They were holding bags of various sizes, which were the most valuable things in their homes. They knelt on the ground and begged the 5-star army not to kill them. They surrendered. "Young master, do you want to send someone into the city to take a look?" Beta Persei saw that the people in the city had come out to surrender. He thought that Lahore city was already in his hands, so he said with a smile, "There's no need. The temperature in the city isn't too low right now. Moreover, the fire hasn't been completely extinguished yet. Let's wait a little longer. We don't lack the time to wait." Yang Qindong shook his head. Yang Xia was able to achieve what he had today under his leadership. Naturally, Dutsong played a very important role, but at the same time, his cautiousness was also very important. Otherwise, in the face of so many ambitious and ruthless people, he would have been eaten alive long ago, leaving not even his bones behind. Yes. Facing Yang Qindong's cautiousness, Beta Persei's face also became a lot more serious. He also began to reflect on whether he was a little too complacent after winning the battle. It seems that he has to change in the future and become more calm. It's just that Beta Persei has nothing to do with the word calm. It was not easy to teach this kind of person, who would shout and scream whenever there was a battle, to be cautious. Chapter 1543. The city of Lahore changed hands just like that. Because the 5-star army had set up an encirclement in advance and did not let any enemy escape, the news did not spread. It was likely that many people were still hoping for a counterattack. The Indian army was the most typical example. The world's first cavalry army and the first cavalry army were like two meteors that streaked across the sky. They entered the Indian territory at lightning speed and took over the important border city of Tultan. Next, they split up and attacked from two directions. In a short period of time, they caught the Indian army off guard and took over a dozen cities. When the news reached the capital of India, King Jawaharlal Nehru was really shocked. He originally thought that the appearance of the 5-star army would lead to a battle with the Delhi Sultanate. By then, no matter who won or lost, he would be able to act according to the situation. He would have ample time to prepare and reap the benefits. Who would have thought that the enemy would appear so soon? Also, from the information he received, the 5-star army did not take over Lahore. How did they have the courage to enter the Indian territory? Was they not afraid that the Sultanate would cut off their path of retreat? At this time, Nehru still could not see his own weakness, which was being conservative. He rarely fought outside. Occasionally, he would send troops to fight against small countries like the Sultanate. This made him feel very good and he thought that the Indian army was invincible. This mentality of not being able to go out and take a look was similar to the mentality of the Qing army in the late Qing dynasty. When such an army encountered a truly powerful force, the opponent would teach them how to behave in a matter of minutes. There were too many things that he could not understand, but time did not allow Nehru to think too much. He also received news that the battleships of the 5-star army had begun to move towards some coastal towns in the country. Unfortunately, the city he was in was close to the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean. This kind of attack from both land and sea really gave him a headache. If it was only a unilateral attack by the army or navy, he would not be afraid. India had a population of nearly 10 million. In addition to the 500,000 standing army, it could recruit no less than 1 million troops at any time. With this, he was confident that he could use the human wave tactic to drive out any opponent that entered the country. However, when the land and sea came together, he felt very passive. It seemed that he couldn't attack either one first. Moving the capital. After thinking about it, it seemed that this was the only decision that could solve his crisis in the shortest time possible. As long as he was far away from the coastal cities, the threat of the Five-Star Army's navy would be reduced to the lowest. At that time, he would have more than enough time to fight against the Five-Star Army. Moving the capital was a huge matter and involved too many things. It wasn't something that could be done just because one wanted to. When Zhu Di wanted to move the capital of the Great Ming dynasty from Nanjing to Beijing, he had prepared for several years. However, what Nehru lacked the most now was time. If he continued to wait, how many more cities would the 100,000 cavalrymen of the Five-Star Army attack? Also, once the Five-Star Army's navy appeared outside Mumbai, he could only passively take a beating. In order to not worsen the situation, Nehru first chose the location of the new capital, which was Bidar city in the central region of the country. Not far from the city was the Godavari River, which could be used as a barrier to block the charge of the Five-Star Army's cavalrymen. Moreover, there were many mountains and roads that were not convenient. If it was during normal times, it would be somewhat unsuitable as the capital. After all, it was not conducive to economic development. However, during wartime, it was the best place to defend. It was similar to Chongqing in the country. After making the decision, Nehru summoned the civil and military officials and announced the decision in person. After that, he did not dare to say that there were objections and announced the dismissal of the court. He also needed time to arrange everything. For example, the number of concubines and children in the palace was quite a lot. The sudden move of the capital shocked many people. For example, most of the officials had bought a lot of properties in the capital. Those were things that could not be taken away. Now that the capital was suddenly moved, what were they going to do with those things? Those were immovable property that could not be taken away. Usually, when Nehru, as the king, made a decision, his subordinates usually did not dare to oppose it. After all, it would affect the dignity of the king of the country. However, when an order involved the interests of the majority, it was difficult to carry out the order even if it was given by the king. Just like in India at this time, the officials actually collectively opposed the move of the capital. So much so that the palace began to make preparations. However, the officials were stubborn and refused to budge. Time was wasted like this. Due to the failure of the government order, not only did it buy more time for the Five-Star Army to arrive, it also caused the situation in India to become a mess. Nehru was indeed an ambitious and ruthless figure. Seeing that his officials did not listen to his orders, he angrily led the people in the palace and went straight to Vidal city, leaving more than 80% of the officials in Mumbai. Originally, he wanted to kill one or two of them to intimidate the others. However, he was afraid that if he really did that, it would cause internal strife and cause everyone to oppose him. So, he had no choice but to do it. The king actually left, bringing only the members of the royal family and less than 20% of the obedient officials with him. When the news spread out, the officials became a little anxious. They were blaming themselves for pushing the king too hard. Should they lower their heads and follow the king when he left? State Preceptor Qiao Han stood up and publicly said that moving the capital was an important matter for the country. How could it be done just like that? The king's action was mostly to throw a tantrum. As long as the officials did not leave with him, it would not be long before the king would definitely return. When the time came, everyone would collectively go forward and admit their mistakes and the matter would be over. The state preceptor's words struck a chord in the hearts of some people. For a time, they followed him. As the state preceptor, Qiao Han enjoyed a very high status in India. Now that he stood up and said these things, many people thought that they had found the root of the problem. As a result, even if the king left the capital, the officials still had no intention of following him. How would they know that some of Qiao Han's actions had already incurred Nehru's dissatisfaction? Qiao Han was the one who had previously prevented him from helping the Khaganate send troops. Because of this, Nehru had long thought of replacing him. If it were not for the change in the situation, George would have been arrested and punished by now. Nehru knew this, but the officials did not. So, after the king was gone, everyone instinctively followed the state preceptor's lead. However, others did not know, but as the state preceptor himself, Qiao Han knew. Feeling that his position was in danger, in order to save himself, he took the initiative to look for Yunk this time. After a discussion, these words came out. Yunk, the former director of the Foreign Affairs Group of the Security Bureau, was transferred to the Central Asia region more than a year ago to serve as the branch director. His most glorious achievement was to instigate the rebellion of the famous General Chen Di of Jiaoxi, Yunnan province, as well as Long Qi, He Guang, and others of the Lansang kingdom. Considering that he was good at this time, he was entrusted with the position of the branch director of the Central Asia Region Security Bureau by Director Yang San. As soon as he came here, Yunk investigated a lot of information and selected some people who could be targeted. This state preceptor Qiao Han was among them. Under his efforts, the greedy Qiao Han really became good friends with Yunk. In front of a large amount of gold and silver, although he had vaguely guessed Yunk's identity, Qiao Han did not mention it. He even helped him to do a big thing, which was to prevent King Nehru from sending troops to help the Khaganate alliance. It seemed that he was living off the Khaganate alliance, but in fact, things like collusion with foreign countries were too common in history. Especially during the Warring States period, it was the most common thing. Often, when one side could not defeat the other, they would find a way to deal with the other side. Then, there would be cases of troops retreating when they almost reached the capital of a country. In the end, Qiao Han was the state preceptor, not the king. This difference of one word was the difference between a monarch and a minister. The monarch was permanent, but the minister could be changed. At that time, most people became officials only for money. Otherwise, there would not be a saying that thousands of miles became an official only for money. When Yunk took out something that satisfied Qiao Han, he naturally had to speak up for him. In a way, the two of them could be considered friends. Nehru intended to take down Qiao Han, the state preceptor. This was a friend in trouble, so Yunk should stand up and think of a way for him, which led to the current situation. Nehru did not know about this. He did not leave the capital in a moment of impulse. He wanted to force everyone to follow him. He was using practical actions to make everyone choose. This plan was feasible. Originally, there were already some ministers who wanted to follow, but because of Qiao Han's interference, everything turned into nothing. After knowing the reactions of the ministers in the city, Nehru was furious. He wanted to immediately cut Qiao Han into pieces. Men secretly informed the people in the capital to kill Qiao Han. Nehru knew that if Qiao Han did not die, it would be difficult for the ministers to move the capital, so he gritted his teeth and said fiercely. Nehru wanted to kill Qiao Han, but it was too late. Whether it was Qiao Han's wisdom or Yunk's experience, how could they not have guessed this? They were already prepared. Not only did they change Qiao Han's residence, but they also increased the security around him by several times. In the next few days, there were no less than 4 or 5 attempts on Qiao Han's life. But under the tight security, even the assassins did not see the shadow of the target. Under the continuous assassination, Qiao Han was determined to follow the 5-star army to the end. Chapter 1544. If Jawaharlal Nehru were to win this battle, he would lose his head first. Qiao Han's cooperation made Skylark very satisfied. At this time, the 5-star army's navy arrived outside the port of Bombay. After the two discussed it, they decided to go all out and directly welcome the navy. Thus, Bombay fell. Before the war even started, Bombay, the capital of India, was peacefully accepted by the 5-star army. How did this trick work? Everyone who saw it was confused. When the news reached the ears of Yang Chendong, who was leading troops into India, his face also changed color. After a long time, he said, Good, ha ha ha, I think Nehru's face must be darker than charcoal's. Seeing that Yang Qindong was in a good mood, Beta Persei on the side also said happily, "Young master, Skylark and the Navy have asked for instructions. What should we do next? Do we need the Marines to land and cooperate with us?" "That's not necessary. Send a telegram to the world's first cavalry army and let Tian Hu send a division to take over Bombay first. As for the Navy, let them do what they should do. After all, the war at sea can't be neglected. It's not good to let them divide their forces," Yang Qindong said with a smile. Compared to the army, which could attack Europe and Central Asia, the Navy could indeed extend its reach all over the world. Their task was more difficult. Originally, Leng Feng's military strength was somewhat insufficient. How could he borrow their strength? On the other hand, most of the land that could be conquered had already been conquered. After these things were solved, the next thing was the matter of the Great Ming Dynasty. Whether it was Baiming or the Great Ming Dynasty, it was time for them to give an explanation. Just as Yang Qindong thought, Nehru's face was really dark. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was as dark as the bottom of a pot. Before this, he had never thought that a mere subject, even if he held the position of the state preceptor, could he sell out the entire country? At this point, it was useless to blame Qiao Han. However, he had to avenge the loss of the country's capital. He had already received news that the Five-Star Army's navy had evacuated from Bombay, leaving behind 10,000 Five-Star Army cavalry. Since this was the case, he must take back the country. He wanted the ministers and people to see that as the King of India, he had the ability to compete with the Five-Star Army. He called his confidant General Ma Tur and gave him 50,000 soldiers, of which 10,000 were cavalry and 40,000 infantry. He ordered him to rush to Bombay. In order to let the army be able to exert their maximum power over the course of the day and night. And there were many officials left in their way, and presumably, the wealth in their hands would not be small amount of wealth B's wealth was. Ma gather S armies B's army, and armies greats, and the armies the army and go B's armies army head set. As soon as they moved, the Five-Star Army received the news that Gong Feng, the division commander of the World Cavalry's 1st Army's 5th Division, was in charge of replacing the navy to guard Bombay. This person was one of Yang Qindong's students, and was also a talent in both civil and military affairs. Tian Hu sent him to guard Bombay after much consideration. For example, once the Indian army counterattacked, the 5th Division commander would definitely not disappoint the mission. In Bombay, when Yang reported the news to Gong Feng, he also carefully observed the division commander who was nearly 30 years old. When he saw that Gong Feng was not anxious, his eyes were as calm as water, and when he looked carefully, a trace of excitement could be seen. Yang knew that his worries were unnecessary. "Director Yun, I will leave 2,000 cavalry for you. At that time, I will need you to take care of the security in the city." Gong Feng already had a plan in his mind. He was afraid that the enemy would not come. Since they came, there was no reason to let them go. Well said, well said. Seeing that Gong Feng was so polite, Yang did not dare to be the slightest bit careless. In terms of rank, one was the branch chief of the security bureau, and the other was a division commander. No one could say for sure who had a higher rank. However, the other party came from the World Cavalry's 1st Army and was Yang Qindong's student. How could a division commander compare to him? Anyway, Yang knew one thing. If he provoked this person, he was an existence that could go straight to heaven. He might not dare to act first and report later, but as long as his mouth was crooked and he said something wrong, it would be enough for him to bear the consequences. Seeing Yang's cooperation, Gong Feng just smiled. For him, a branch chief of the security bureau was really nothing in his eyes. However, he would not offend the other party for no reason. In short, everyone just had to cooperate with each other. After leaving a regiment of cavalry to Yang, Gong Feng left with the other 4 regiments at night. Because the Five-Star Army implemented a curfew after they entered the city, no one noticed that so many cavalry had left the city. Even the spies that Nehru left in the city did not know about it. Gong Feng had already made arrangements for the 5-star barracks in the city. He got the soldiers to shout in unison when they had nothing to do, creating the impression that they were training with a large number of people. This could fool some people for a short period of time. After the matters in the city were arranged, Gong Feng left the city. As for where he went, even Yunk did not know. However, he had a feeling that this general had set up some kind of trap for the enemy to come and take advantage of. However, he did not know if the enemy would fall for it. Would it be inappropriate? Could you please remove the word no? The answer was obvious. He would definitely fall for it. This was because Matur, who was leading the troops, did not know what was happening in the city. He got the news from his spies that everything in Mumbai was as usual. He did not see any reinforcements from the 5-star army, nor did he see any movements from the 5-star army in the city. Caution is the parent of safety. Order the cavalry to be at the back and the infantry to be at the front. Matur was entrusted with such an important task by Nehru, so he naturally had a certain level of ability. He did not think that the 5-star army did not know about his arrival. However, the other party still did not do anything. This was somewhat thought-provoking. Before figuring out the true intentions of the other party, Matur decided to be careful. He placed his cavalry at the back so that if something unexpected happened, he could change according to the situation. It was this move that saved Matur's life. This was because at this time, Gong Feng had already surrounded them with 4 regiments of the world's first cavalry army. Who said that a small number of people could not surround them? With more people, there were still many mountains, forests, and rivers in this area. Gong Feng had already dug a hole and was only waiting for the enemy to enter the hole before pulling in the net. The Indian Army was given another name by the netizens in the future, Indian Army. We all know that Indian Army likes to cheat and do some crazy things. In particular, their arrogance left a deep impression on people. It was like during a military parade, a motorcycle often carried dozens of people. If one said that it was a peacock spreading its tail, then it would be a shame to the beautiful peacock. At this time, although the Indian Army did not have the nickname Indian Army, when it came to arrogance, they were not at all inferior. They were also very poor and arrogant. Their so-called 500,000 standing troops were just some civilian groups that were of moderate age but did not have any formal training. Perhaps in the eyes of many people, the younger troops were a sign of strength. Therefore, other than age, they could be said to be lacking in other aspects. Just like the weapons in their hands now, there were all kinds of weapons. There were long spears, long knives, long swords, short swords, and some wooden sticks mixed in. It gave people the feeling that it was a hodgepodge. However, such an army still had a complacent look. It seemed that no matter what kind of opponent they encountered, with their youth and strength, they could charge and win. They wore unlined clothes, and it was obvious that there was no cloth armor on them, not to mention armor. With such equipment, even Yangtze's local troops could not enter. Now that they were targeted by the elite of the elites, the 1st Cavalry Division, how could they have a good time? When night came, the Indian Army was still hurrying. This was not because they were very obedient, but because Matur, as the general of the army, had painted a big pie for them. After reaching Mumbai, they could loot for 5 days. It was this noble idea that made it impossible for them not to be faster. It seemed that if they were late by 1 step, they would not be able to get anything. This caused the formation of the Indian Army to be in disarray. Many of them were already panting heavily, but no one was willing to give up on the journey and give up on their dreams and goals that they couldn't achieve. In the forest beside the official road, Division Commander Gong Feng was looking at the scene in front of him with night vision binoculars. At first, he was even a little dumbfounded. This was very different from what he imagined a regular army to be. At one point, he thought that this was a trap prepared by the enemy for him to enter. After observing for a while, he saw that the last 10,000 cavalrymen were finally wearing cloth armor. Only then did he breathe a sigh of relief. Although cloth armor was the lowest equipment and was not in Gong Feng's eyes, at least there was a difference. Since the cavalrymen were wearing cloth armor, it was very reasonable for the infantry not to wear armor. Seeing the Indian army enter his encirclement unknowingly, Gong Feng, who originally only had a 70% chance of winning, was now at least 90%. He couldn't help but wonder how the Indian soldiers would react when faced with a charge from a cavalryman clad in solid armor. Would they be defeated in one hit? Everything had to be done with facts. In the darkness, a bright red flash suddenly rose in the forest. In an instant, the dazzling light attracted everyone's attention. Thank you for the monthly tickets and rewards from Blazing Flame 3-inch nail. Thank you for Ji Pingan's red packet reward. Again, I will solicit votes for Langzi's new book, Duke Fierce. Friends who pretend to be real can go and take a look. Langzi admits that he is very diligent. Thank you again for your support. If you still have a recommendation ticket or a collection ticket, please vote. This is very important for the new book. Langzi knows that everyone is supporting him and will be more diligent. Thank you. Military Supply de Ming will be completed soon. I will strive to update 4 to 3 times a day before the completion. Don't worry, no matter what happens, I will not stop updating. I guarantee a smooth completion. Thank you again for your support. Chapter 1545. The sudden appearance of the red light immediately attracted the attention of the 50,000 Yin soldiers. They were still wondering what it was and why it was so bright and beautiful. Suddenly, the sound of horse hooves could be heard from below their feet and into their ears. It's an ambush. Ma Tuer, who was riding his horse, also saw the red light. Instinctively, he had a bad feeling. When the sound of hooves entered his ears, his first reaction was that the enemy had arrived. He had not received any reports and there shouldn't be any cavalry from the 5-star army nearby. So where did this commotion come from? What was going on? With 70% confusion and 30% doubt, Ma Tuer followed the sound and looked forward. What he saw was the chaotic scene of the army formation. The 5th Heavenly Cavalry Division had attacked. The red signal flare was the order to launch an all-out attack. A total of 4 regiments, totaling 8,000 cavalrymen, charged out from all directions, charging towards the Indian infantrymen on the main road. Before they even arrived, the Big Dipper crossbows in their hands were already activated. As the arrows rained down, the Indian soldiers who did not know what was going on were met with a barrage of attacks. He didn't greet them, nor did he challenge them to a fight. The first thing he did was launch an all-out attack. As the crossbow bolts rained down one after another, cries of agony could be heard coming from the Indian soldiers who were dressed in simple clothes. This was the biggest difference between having armor and not having armor. In some dynasties, in order to not suppress the bravery of the commoners, the officials allowed them to carry weapons or self-made crossbows. However, they would definitely not be allowed to carry armor. Just from this point alone, one could see the difference between having armor and not having armor. On the battlefield, even when faced with a rain of arrows, soldiers with armor had a 30% chance of survival. Even when facing an opponent, they could still be injured in 4 or 5 places before dying. However, soldiers without armor did not have such ability. Usually, victory or defeat would be decided in a single exchange. The Indian soldiers without armor were completely defenseless against the Big Dipper crossbows at close range. Initially, they thought that this would be a good mission. They only needed to rush to Mumbai and attack the city with their advantage in numbers. By then, there should be reinforcements from the city. By then, the city gate would be breached under the pincer attack from both sides. By then, it would be time for them to reap the rewards. Who would have thought that they would run into enemies halfway through their journey? Moreover, it was when they were extremely tired. At this moment, facing the crossbow bolts from afar, even if some people wanted to turn around, they couldn't do so. Not to mention, the 5-star army's cavalry seemed to be everywhere. They didn't even know which direction to run to. They were like headless flies. Other than being helpless and dying, they didn't know what to do. In the future, when tens of thousands of Ming soldiers faced thousands of Jian New soldiers, they would be defeated in one blow. In the future, when tens of thousands of Ming soldiers faced hundreds of Japanese soldiers, they would also frantically retreat and throw away their cannons. This was enough to prove the difference between elite soldiers and mediocre soldiers, as well as the difference between good equipment and plain clothes. Just like now, facing the fully armed soldiers of the world's first cavalry army and facing a sudden attack, the 40,000 Indian soldiers did not even have the chance to resist and were thrown into chaos. In the battle, there were countless people who died from being trampled. In the end, someone shouted, "Abandon your weapons and kneel on the ground. Those who surrender will live." In the dark night, black figures knelt on the ground one after another. Their movements were so orderly that it was as if they had rehearsed it hundreds of times. Compared to the incompetence of the infantrymen, the performance of the cavalrymen was slightly better. However, it was only slightly better. Under General Mature's orders, they even launched a counterattack. However, it was obvious that their cloth armor could not block the arrows from piercing through their bodies. However, what was even more unexpected was that when the battle was at its climax and the Indian cavalrymen still had the advantage in numbers, Mature, who was leading the troops, actually led the 1,000 or so cavalrymen to escape. This was because he could not see any hope of victory. In addition, in the dark night, he did not know how many 5-star army soldiers there were. He was very worried that if he continued to fight, he would lose his life here. As such, he might as well just leave. The fact that their general had escaped was a huge blow to the Indian cavalrymen. In addition, the 5-star army's cavalrymen seemed to have an endless supply of arrows. In the end, they also chose to surrender. 8,000 against 50,000. With the advantage of equipment and combat experience, the battle was over in just over 6 hours when the sun rose. At this time, the Indian soldiers realized that there were less than 10,000 of the 5-star army soldiers surrounding them. However, at this moment, they no longer had any weapons and were like meat on a chopping board. They could not muster up any will to resist. When evening came, Division Commander Gong Feng led the army back to Mumbai with 30,000 Indian soldiers. This scene was witnessed by the common people in the city. They did not know when the 5-star army left the city, but when they saw that only a few thousand cavalrymen were able to escort tens of thousands of Indian soldiers into the city, many of the common people's faces turned gloomy. Their own army was so weak that it caused the little bit of pride in their hearts to diminish. After Mature's army was defeated, he returned to Vidar city 3 days later. He cried and complained about the shamelessness of the 5-star army. He even exaggerated that 70 to 80,000 5-star army cavalrymen surrounded them and set fire and arrows on them. In the end, he was unable to turn the situation around and killed his way back. King Nehru's face was naturally filled with anger. He cursed Mature's incompetence in his heart. He did not believe that there would be any 5-star army cavalrymen around Mumbai city. However, considering that they were in dire need of manpower, if he really killed Mature, it would inevitably cause panic among the other generals. In the end, he only reprimanded Mature and allowed him to take the blame. In the eyes of the other generals, Nehru displayed the image of a benevolent king. Everyone praised him endlessly. The rest of the generals expressed that when they encountered the main forces of the 5-star army, they would definitely risk their lives to repay the king's kindness. In the eyes of Nehru, all of these made him very satisfied. He took the opportunity to announce that he would send out 300,000 soldiers and set up a defensive line in front of the Godavari River. For this, he even took out the cannons and guns he bought from the Westerners and put on a look that said he would take care of whoever came. However, no matter what, after Matl's defeat, Nehru's thoughts of splitting up his forces had been resolved. He could be considered to have completely given up on the vast land north of the Godavari River, and instead used a passive method to wait for the 5-star army's arrival. Time passed quickly. Half a month later, Yang Qindong brought the main forces of the 5-star army to Mumbai city. Outside the city gate, Division Commander Gong Feng held a grand welcoming ceremony. When the 5-star army entered the city one after another, the neat marching formation and the excellent equipment were displayed one by one in front of the Indian people. Some people who originally wanted to wait for the king to come back unknowingly gave up on that idea. The troops just entered the city normally, but some people's thoughts of resistance were extinguished. At this point, Yang Qindong had fully understood and used what was called creating momentum. Over the years, he had also become better at using the people's hearts and using momentum to achieve what he wanted. The army only stayed in Mumbai city for 2 days. After a short rest, they went out of the city and went straight to the Godavari River. Nehru was waiting for a decisive battle. How could this not be what Yang Qindong wanted to see? Although the Delhi Sultanate had been attacked in the Battle of Myanmar and had to withdraw 20,000 troops, the pressure there had been reduced to a certain extent. But after all, the war was still going on. Every day that was delayed would cause the development of the Delhi Sultanate to stagnate. If he could settle the matter of India earlier, he could send troops to help. In comparison, if he could have a decisive battle with the Indian army earlier, he would not delay it by a day. Tian Hu, the commander of the 1st Cavalry Army, and Su He, the commander of the new army, who had rushed to the Godavari River, had already reported that the Indian army had placed many cannons on the opposite side of the Godavari River. They even saw nearly 10,000 flintlock soldiers. This was the main reason why they had no choice but to stop the charge. It was just that this defensive formation was naturally a great existence in the eyes of the cavalry. But in Yang Qindong's eyes, it was really nothing. Comparing firearms? His Ling Feng was definitely at the ancestral level. When the 2nd and 4th divisions heard the news, they were also very excited. When they found out that the other party also had firearms, they really wanted to see for themselves. Compared to the cold weapons that were charging at them, they preferred to destroy firearms. It seemed to bring them more glory. In their excitement, the army moved very quickly. In just 5 days, they had reached the opposite side of the Godavari River. At the same time, the heavy cannons and other weapons in Ling Feng's hands arrived as well. The 5-star army had finally arrived. Nehru, who was in Bidar city at the rear, was also the first to receive the news. From this moment on, he became a little anxious. Although he had spent a lot of money to buy these firearms, how good were their performance? The power of these firearms had yet to be tested. At the same time, he also knew that the 5-star army also had firearms. He just did not know who would be more powerful when the two sides met. Just as Nehru was feeling anxious, on the morning of the 2nd day after the 5-star army arrived, the 2nd and 4th divisions of Ling Feng began to move. 75mm field cannons were pushed out from the army, constantly moving towards the Godavari River. During the meeting in the tent last night, Yang Qindong had introduced the range of the cannons to everyone. They could only fire about 3 li. Although these cannons were considered decent weapons back then, in the eyes of Ling Feng, they were really not enough. As the soldiers of Ling Feng pushed the cannons forward, they were naturally filled with confidence. They only stopped when they were about 3.5 li away. Chapter 1546. They were both using cannons and exploding shells, but the range of the cannons was 6 li. The distance of the cannons was more than twice that of the enemy's. The outcome of the battle had already been decided before it even began. Everyone, pay attention. Once the enemy's cannons are destroyed, it will be time for our cavalry to charge. At that time, everyone must seize the opportunity to cross the river. The first to reach the other side will be given the highest merit. As the various divisions and commanders pushed forward with the cannons, they also mobilized their soldiers. According to the battle plan Yang Qindong had laid out last night, bombarding the enemy's firearms was only the first step. The most crucial step was to cross the river and fight. If they couldn't do that, it would only be a small victory. For this reason, the officers of the various armies and divisions who had accepted the mission mobilized their troops to chop down all the trees in the vicinity as soon as the sun rose. They made simple wooden bridges so that they could cross the river at any time. This time, those who followed Yang Qindong were all veterans who had been on the battlefield. Many of them were no longer afraid of war. On the contrary, because of Yang Qindong's emphasis on military merit, many of them were excited as if they had been injected with chicken blood. They were afraid that there would be no war to fight. That would make all the skills they had learned useless. It could be said that it was precisely because of this powerful security system and the establishment of military merit awards that the five-star army would not develop a battle weariness even when they were fighting everywhere. It wasn't easy for them to rely on war to live a good life. How could they dislike war and give it up in the end? With their fighting spirit and high morale, coupled with the strongest equipment and the most powerful firearms, who could stand against them? When the cannons were pushed to the front of the Godavari River, only 1.5 li away from the Indian cannons, the 2 divisions and 400 cannons stopped. Following that, boxes of cannons were pulled up by horses and mules. The cannons were opened and the cannons were dismantled. The preparations for the cannons were done in an orderly manner. On the other side of the Godavari River, many of the Indian generals saw all of this. Mathur, who was trying to redeem himself, even estimated the distance between the two sides. When he confirmed that it wasn't within the range of the cannons, he could only shake his head helplessly. Then, he looked at the five-star army on the other side of the river. He wanted to see what the Han army was going to do. At the same time, he would occasionally glance at the rear of the army. Due to his previous experience of being defeated by the five-star army, he had formed a 20,000-man inspection team. If anyone dared to take a step back during the battle, they would be treated as deserters and killed without mercy. It was precisely because of this preparation, coupled with the danger of the Godavari River in front of them and the firearms and cannons on the side, that Tuur felt a bit more confident in this battle. Last check, reload the cannons in 3 minutes. As the commander of the Leng 2nd Division, Xiao Feng's experience came into play. This time, he became the commander of both the Leng 2nd Division and the Leng 4th Division. In the following time, the cannoneers quickly checked the cannons. When there were no problems, the soldiers picked up the cannons and prepared to reload at any time. Xiao Feng turned around and after confirming that there were no problems, his expression turned serious. As he shouted for the cannons to fire, the small red flag in his right hand fell down. Instantly, 400 cannons fired at the same time towards the other side of the Godavari River. There was no test firing, nor was there any calibration. There were simply too many Indian soldiers on the other side of the river. Looking from afar, it seemed as though there was no end to the number of tents. With so many targets, it was impossible for the cannon to miss. Shio shio shio. Shio shio shio. The cannons let out a pleasant sound as they pierced through the air and landed on the Indian camp on the other side of the Godavari River. Some landed on the enemy's cannons, some landed among the gunners, and some landed among the archers. There were even some that landed beside the tents, uprooting them one by one. With a loud bang, the orderly Indian camp was replaced by a cloud of smoke. Cries and screams could be heard from the camp. The cannons landed with a loud bang and a ferocious force that greatly exceeded the expectations of the Indian soldiers. When many of them were hit by the cannons, their bodies were smashed to pieces, or they were injured by the aftershocks of the cannons, losing an arm or a leg. The camp was filled with the cries of ghosts and howls of wolves. Mathur, who was riding on his horse, was also frightened by this scene. His warhorse also shook its head and wagged its tail because of the loud explosion. If he did not control it with all his might, it would have already turned tail and fled. Calm down, calm down. Facing this sudden change, although Mathur's face was pale, he still did his duty and shouted, "Immediately order the cannons to fire back." Although he knew that the distance was not enough, Mathur could not think of a better idea. If they didn't do anything, the army wouldn't be far from collapsing. The order was given to the cannons and the cannons at the front started to reload. One cannonball after another was loaded into the cannons. Then, a loud explosion sounded and the cannonballs landed on the five-star army across the river. The sound of the cannonballs brought hope to the Indian soldiers. Many of them were looking at this scene, hoping that their cannons would succeed. Boom boom boom, boom boom boom, the sound of cannons rang out and landed about 200 to 300 meters in front of the five-star army, creating craters one after another. However, that was it. With the limited range, these cannons could not harm the five-star army at all. Destroy all the cannons. Fire. Xiao Feng's face was cold. Although the enemy's cannons could not harm him, the sound of the cannons was a provocation to him. Since they dared to fire back, he would not be able to recognize his parents if he did not beat them up. He would not be able to live up to his position as a division commander and the 2 golden badges on his shoulders. Compared to the other division commanders of the Cold Front, who had the title of Major General, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Division commanders were all lieutenant generals. The sound of cannons being fired rang out once more, the target being the Indian cannons. Amidst the earth-shattering sounds, more and more cannons became the targets of the Indian cannons and were blasted into smithereens. The soldiers were also blasted into the sky, and there were countless casualties. Without the threat of the enemy's cannons, the 400 field cannons of the 5-star army took turns moving forward. They needed to extend their firepower and prepare for the other armies to cross the Godavari River. With the extension of the cannons, the Indian army that thought they were safe became hell. Even Mathur had no choice but to retreat. However, his gaze was fixed on the Godavari River. He believed that after the cannons fired, the 5-star army would force their way across the river. That would be the moment when the 2 sides clashed. That would be the time for him to counterattack. The sound of the cannons continued to ring out. It was as though the cannons did not cost any money. The other 5-star army also used this time to start building the pontoon bridges. The Godavari River was not very wide. It was less than 2 miles wide. The most important thing was that the river was not deep. The shallowest part was only a meter deep and the deepest part was only 3 meters deep. Furthermore, the river was not turbulent. Under such conditions, the 5-star army only needed to follow their usual training and build the pontoon bridges. By the time the giant logs were laid down one after another to form a bridge, it was already more than 4 hours later. With the combined efforts of 30,000 soldiers, the first pontoon bridge was completed. Following that, the 2 regiments of the 2nd Regiment and the 4th Regiment became the first batch of soldiers to cross the bridge. They held on to their Type 95 rifles and various heavy and light machines. They carried enough ammunition and rushed to the other side of the river. Very quickly, they established the first line of defense. With just one pontoon bridge, it was unknown how long it would take for an army of 200,000 to cross. Thus, the 2nd and 3rd pontoon bridges were quickly constructed. Compared to the difficulty of the first pontoon bridge, the subsequent construction was much faster. They could build both pontoons at the same time. In the end, they only needed to connect the pontoons. The main focus of the 5-star army was still on the pontoon bridges. This gave the Indian army a chance to counterattack. Mater, who had been waiting for this opportunity, immediately gave the order for the entire army to charge forward. Not only did they have to blast the 5-star army into the river, they also had to destroy the pontoon bridges. This was also the only chance for the Indian army to turn the tables. As long as they did not allow the 5-star army to cross the river, they would be in an invincible position. Behind them were the 20,000 soldiers of the inspection team, who were staring at them like tigers watching their prey. To the majority of the Indian army, they could either stand there and wait for the cannons to blast them to pieces or charge forward and chase the 5-star army back. Without any other choice, more and more Indian soldiers chose to take the initiative to attack. In their eyes, this was not only a matter of luck. If they did well, they could even earn merits. It was the only way for them to survive. In the blink of an eye, more and more Indian soldiers launched their counterattack. They held on to all sorts of weapons and shouted out various slogans to boost their courage. Some of them even tore off their clothes, leaving their upper bodies bare. It was as though they were fighting to the death. With so many people charging forward, the aura they exuded was shocking. If it was a cowardly person, they would have already trembled and not know what to do. However, for the battle-hardened soldiers of the Cold Front, such a small battle was nothing. On the contrary, with so many military merits in front of them, everyone's eyes lit up. Their fingers involuntarily reached for the trigger. Chapter 1547. Everyone, don't be impatient. Let's get closer before fighting. As the commander of the 4th Division, Ling Daqiang's eyes were shining as he spoke. Unknowingly, he had already picked up a light machine gun and was ready to shoot. 800 steps, 700 steps, 600 steps, the Yin army was getting closer and closer. Those with good eyesight could even see the ferocious expressions on their enemies' faces. However, this did not affect the mentality of the cold vanguard soldiers at all. They all remembered the main points of their training, held their breaths, and adjusted their breathing to ensure that they could hit the target more accurately when they fired later. 400 steps, 300 steps, 200 steps, 180 steps. At this distance, it was guaranteed that the 95 style would be able to unleash its greatest power. At this moment, Commander De Chang finally shouted, "Everyone, fire!" Da-da-da. Da-da-da-da. The impatient soldiers of the 5-star army raised their guns and started firing. Countless bullet casings jumped out of their guns and landed beside them. Countless bullets flew forward and hit the Indian soldiers who were charging at them. Puff puff puff. Thump thump thump. Clang clang clang. Under the sounds of gunfire, more and more Indian soldiers were shot dead, falling on the path of the charge. However, the Indian army didn't seem to have any intention of stopping. They were still holding onto their swords, spears, swords, and rods as they shouted loudly. They looked like they wouldn't give up until they achieved their goal. Yang Qindong, who was riding on the white dragon, was also moving forward with the army. Through the binoculars, he saw everything that was happening. At this moment, his heart suddenly trembled violently. He seemed to have seen the scene at Bali Bridge in the late Qing dynasty. Countless Mongolian cavaliers and green camp soldiers roared as they tried to charge into the Anglo-French army's formation. However, they were shot down from their horses halfway. They were enough to use the last bit of courage of that dynasty, using their last bit of strength to win, even if there was only a trace of hope. However, it was useless. Under the intense gunfire, as long as one was not a god, they would not be able to break through this deadly blockade. It was the same for the Indian army. As they charged forward, many of them fell down. Then, they continued to charge forward and fell down. However, there were simply too many Indian soldiers charging at them. There were at least 100,000 of them, and each formation consisted of 1,000 to 2,000 soldiers. When there were nearly 100 formations charging at them, even the 8,000 cold vanguard warriors could not stop them from advancing even if they continued to fire. Rocket launchers, get ready. Fire. Seeing the ferocity of the Hindustanis, Ling Daqiang was not afraid. Instead, he was delighted. He liked opponents like this who knew they were going to die but still charged forward. It was much better than those who peed their pants at the sound of gunfire and tried to escape. At least this time, they could enjoy themselves to their heart's content. Thump thump thump. Boom boom boom. The rocket launchers of the various regiments launched their attacks. When the rocket launchers crossed a distance of 100 meters and landed in the midst of the Indian soldiers, a single blast would clear out a large area and cause a large number of Indian soldiers to fall down involuntarily. Some of the rocket launchers could even cause about 100 casualties. This was all because the Indian soldiers were too close to each other. The 400 field cannons at the front also began to retreat. After retreating to a certain distance, they landed their cannons within 200 steps of the river. The cannons landed amongst the charging Indian soldiers, causing a large number of casualties. Under the alternating sounds of cannons and gunfire, the area between 80 and 500 steps of the Godawali River was quickly filled with corpses. A rough estimate showed that there were no less than 30,000 people dead. This was the damage done in less than 2 hours. Under such a powerful attack, the Indian soldiers' charge was finally stopped. When they saw that they could not get close to the 5-star army no matter how hard they tried, more and more Indian soldiers started to feel afraid. It was a matter of course that people would die in a war. Anyone in the army would have to make plans and preparations in this regard. However, it was not what everyone wanted to do to die without any hope of victory. When they realized that they would die if they charged forward, some people started to hesitate. Why did they have to rush forward to die, while their comrades behind them could watch all of this from afar without being harmed in the slightest? Without comparison, there would be no emotions and no disappointment. When they realized that the faster they ran, the faster they would die, some of the Hindustanis slowed down on purpose. Some of them even turned around and ran back. That's right, there were 20,000 inspectors behind them. But what if they could break through the blockade of the inspectors? Those people did not have such perverted killing weapons like the 5-star army. This gave them the courage and opportunity to try. Another quarter of an hour passed, and the Indians threw down another 10,000 corpses. De Chang and the rest of the soldiers were shocked to find that there were no more opponents in their sights. All the Indian soldiers began to run back and started to fight with the inspectors who were looking at them from behind. Don't worry about them. Load your weapons and get ready to fight at any time. Ling De Chang only took a glance with his binoculars and ignored the Indian soldiers. After giving the order, he turned around to check on the construction of the pontoon bridge. That's right, 2 pontoon bridges were about to be completed in 2 hours. It could be imagined that more and more cavalry would arrive. That would be the time for them to charge. On the Indian side, the 20,000 inspectors killed countless Indian soldiers. It was only when Mathur sent another 10,000 reinforcements that the situation stabilized. At this moment, there were less than 40,000 Indian soldiers standing in front of them. In other words, 20,000 Indian soldiers had died in that short period of time. Charge back. As long as you charge back, you will have a chance to survive. Otherwise, even if you die, your families will not be taken care of. Mathur knew that the morale of the Indian soldiers was unstable. However, in order not to disappoint the king, he could only grit his teeth and persevere. Charging back meant death. Not charging back meant death. The only difference was that if one died, their families would be taken care of. However, the Indian soldiers had no choice but to turn around. Oh! Or rather, it should be said that they had changed their direction. To them, the weapons in their hands were no different from fire sticks when compared to Ling Feng's muskets. In fact, they were even inferior. They're here again. Seeing that the sky was about to turn dark, the Indian army turned around and prepared to charge at them again. Xiao Feng chuckled and said with a sense of satisfaction, "Cheer up, it's time for us to reap the harvest. Commander Xiao, give us a chance." Just as the 4 regiments of the Cold Front soldiers were prepared to fire at any moment, the commander of the 1st Cavalry Army, Tian Hu, and the commander of the new army, Su He, arrived behind Xiao Feng. Although the 3 of them held different positions, they were all lieutenant generals. In terms of status, they were about the same. Therefore, they were very polite when they spoke to each other. When the 2 commanders spoke to Xiao Feng in unison, he also felt a trace of pressure. What? Have the armies of the 2 commanders already crossed the river? Xiao Feng asked, not answering the question directly. He noticed from the corner of his eyes that the cavalry soldiers were still crossing the river and had not started to gather. No, but it will take at most 15 minutes for them to cross the river. They don't need to gather to charge. By the way, Commander Xiao, as you know, the construction of this place will require a lot of manpower. Even if they are all moved away in the end, many families can't live without men. Thus, it's better to capture as many captives as possible. Tian Hu urged his horse forward and spoke with a sincere expression. Tian Hu's words were not his own analysis. They were words that Yang Qindong had said in public announcements more than once. As the commander of the Cold Front soldiers and an extremely senior person, Xiao Feng naturally knew this was the truth. He could continue to kill the enemy, but it would be bad if he delayed the 6th young master's plan to rule the country. After lowering his head and thinking for a while, Xiao Feng finally raised his head and said, "All right, you guys hurry up and cross the river. Before you officially enter the battlefield, if the Indian soldiers attack, we will have to fight them back." This meant that Xiao Feng had agreed. Once the cavalry entered the battlefield, they would stop fighting. Upon hearing this, Tian Hu and Su He couldn't help but nod. They were impressed by Xiao Feng's ability to see the big picture. All right, thank you, Commander Xiao. We are all working for the sixth young master and for the development of our people. This is what I should do. Xiao Feng chuckled and returned to his commanding position. As the commander of the 2nd Division of the Cold Front, he had a firearm in his hand. His every move was watched by many people. This was especially so when he interacted with other commanders or division commanders. He didn't want to be noticed by others because he wasn't paying attention. Even if the 6th young master didn't doubt his loyalty, it was inevitable that there would be people who would gossip behind his back. If that was the case and someone reported this to the 6th young master, he might have to resign from his position to avoid trouble. Xiao Feng saw everything clearly. After he finished speaking, he turned around and left. Tianhu and Su He looked at each other, cupped their fists, and left as well. Since Xiao Feng could see through it, how could they not understand the logic behind it? Since ancient times, generals with great power were easily suspected. They wouldn't make mistakes just because they weren't paying attention. As soon as Xiao Feng returned to his commanding position, he saw a large group of Indian soldiers charging towards the river. They were less than 700 steps away from the cold front. As usual, shoot when they are 300 steps away, Xiao Feng said casually. Xiao Feng casually said this as he took the light machine gun from the guard's hand and began to inspect it. Left with no choice, the 40,000 Hindustanis chose to continue charging forward. Chapter 1548. They knew that rushing forward would most likely result in death, but they had no other choice. General Mater obviously wanted to use them to consume the ammunition of the 5-star army. The only thing they could do was to be a somewhat useful live target. Knowing that they would die, most of the Hindustanis simply threw away the weapons in their hands. To them, in the face of firearms, there was no difference whether they had weapons in their hands or not. Since that was the case, they might as well die in a relaxed manner. A total of 40,000 people walked forward step by step in a densely packed formation. Some soldiers even held hands with each other. It seemed that only by doing so would they not be so lonely on the road to the underworld after death. Even though the sky had already darkened, there were still people moving about in the vast and mighty army of 40,000 people. These were all human lives. Even though they were of a different race, many of the Cold Front warriors still couldn't bear to see this happen. Even Beta Persei and the others who were standing in the middle of the army seemed to have the same thought. Many of them even deliberately looked at Yang Qindong, who was riding on the white dragon. Perhaps they wanted their master to be merciful to their opponents. How could Yang Qindong not feel the gazes of these people intentionally or unintentionally looking at him? But his heart was like a boulder and did not waver in the slightest. He would never forget how the Hindustanis in the future rebelled against China. When you were needed, you could say anything. When you were not needed, you could be as cruel as possible. Looting, burning, and killing were all kinds of evil, but their country did not care. Instead, they allowed such things to happen. Because of this, many outstanding Chinese people suffered losses in this matter, and even lost their lives because of it. Since there was a chance now, of course, he would not let these people live, let alone let history repeat itself. Give the order. Unless you kneel down and surrender, you are the enemy. You know how to treat the enemy. After Yang Qindong said this, no one dared to say anything else. Some smart ones had already run to the front to pass the order. In fact, there was no need to give any special orders. Since Yang Qindong did not give any new orders, they would just follow the same old routine. Therefore, before the messenger could cross the river and reach the front line, the 5-star army had already opened fire. The vanguard of the 40,000 Hindustanis was already within 300 paces, and under the full force of their firepower, wave after wave of Indian soldiers fell to the ground. After being shot, some of the Hindustanis even had a look of relief on their faces. Perhaps this way, they would no longer have any worries. The gunshots did not stop, and the casualties of the Hindustanis continued to increase. Under the heavy firepower of the Leng Feng soldiers, no one could get within 100 steps of them. Most of them were shot dead between 300 and 200 steps. This phenomenon continued until a quarter of an hour later, when the most elite cavalry of the two five-star army had already crossed the river. Then, without waiting for the formation to be completed, the two commanders, Tianhu and Suhi, commanded the cavalry to charge forward, one on the left and one on the right. The moment the cavalry charged, the Lengfeng soldiers stopped shooting. In just a short while, bullets had already fallen to the ground beneath their feet. Now that they no longer had to shoot, many of the soldiers began to massage their arms. It was obvious that shooting was a strenuous job, and it was very tiring to shoot for a long time. Charge! Those who drop their weapons and kneel down will live. Tens of thousands of the five-star army's elite cavalry charged, and the battle cry rang out everywhere. They shouted in the Hindustani language that they had just learned. In fact, it was just a Hindustani language to force the enemy to surrender, and it was not difficult to learn. Just a moment ago, they were still facing firearms attacks, and suddenly, the enemy changed tactics. Many of the Hindustanis widened their eyes, and they did not know what to do. It was true that infantry was at a disadvantage against cavalry, but it was not to say that they did not have a chance. But when they wanted to fight back, they found that the weapons in their hands had been thrown to the ground at some point. At this time, how could it be so easy to find them in the dark? Run! Seeing that the Han cavalry was getting closer, many of the Hindustanis' faces changed. To them, they would rather be killed by a flintlock. At least they would die a quick death. However, if they were hit by a warhorse, it was very likely that they would not die immediately. Instead, they would have to suffer a lot. This was not what they wanted. The tens of thousands of Hindustanis were all panicking, and the originally orderly formation became very chaotic. Everyone turned around and ran. It was as if whoever was a step slower would suffer the pain of being trampled by 10,000 horses. In such a chaotic environment, how many people would seriously listen to the five-star army's slogans to surrender? Due to the cavalry's charge, the battlefield became even more chaotic. This greatly exceeded the expectations of Grand General Matu Air behind him. He did not deny that the infantry was sent to exhaust the five-star army's ammunition. He had seen the firearms that his king bought from the west, and he knew that it required a lot of gunpowder to fire. Once there was no gunpowder, the gun was no different from an ordinary stick. He hated the fact that the five-star army appeared and destroyed his artillery and firearms. Otherwise, he would not have to use manpower to exhaust bullets in exchange for a chance to win. However, who would have thought that the gunshots would stop? Just when he was thinking that the five-star army's gunpowder was about to run out, he suddenly saw the black shadow rushing back. Not only that, the ground under his feet began to tremble. What's going on? After Matu Air exclaimed, he instantly thought of a possibility. Then he said in shock, "Not good, the five-star army's cavalry has already crossed the river. They are charging. Come, archers, where are the archers? Prepare to counterattack." As he shouted, Matu's eyes revealed a hint of joy. Although the cavalry was not easy to deal with, it was still better than the untouchable firearms. Once the Han cavalry's momentum was restrained, perhaps his opportunity would come. For example, he could push the enemy back and then take the opportunity to lead his troops to charge. With the Han cavalry's cover, the five-star army's firearms would not be able to fire casually. This would create an opportunity for him to rush to the river. This sudden turn of events had indeed caught many of the Indian generals off guard. But after hearing the great general's shout, many people calmed down from their panic. Then many of the soldiers picked up the bows on their backs and prepared to counterattack. In the dark, there was a limit to the accuracy of a bow and arrow. Unless it was a godly archer, the arrow that was shot out would most likely fly off to who knows where. Fortunately, they had enough soldiers. When the rain of arrows fell, even Meng Yi would be able to deal a heavy blow to the five-star army's cavalry. It was a good idea, but they forgot one thing. That was, in front of the five-star army's cavalry, there were still tens of thousands of their own troops. Even though they had been suppressed by Leng Feng for 15 minutes, there were still more than 30,000 people. This was not a small force. Because they did not want to be trampled to death by the cavalry, their retreat not only made it difficult for the archers to shoot, but also caused them to charge back into their own camp, causing even more damage. It was not a bad idea, but it had already become a reality. Under the pursuit of the cavalry, under the heavy sound of iron hooves, the Hindustanis desperately ran back. Even when they reached their own camp, they did not have any intention of stopping. Perhaps they did not want to be trampled to death, or perhaps they wanted to return to their own camp to seek reinforcements. But no matter what, they still charged back, causing damage to Matuer's defense and the archers' counterattack. It's a success. Everyone, attack. Extend the cannons and bring out those mortars as well. With the help of the binoculars, Yang Qindong saw the Hindustanis frantically running back and his own cavalry chasing after them. Although he could only see a rough picture in the dark, with his many years of experience, he believed that it was a success. Soldiers were defeated like a landslide. This was the scene in front of him. Once the situation on the battlefield became irreversible, even if they wanted to, it would be impossible to reverse the situation. When Beta Persei heard that they were going to use the mortars, how could he remain calm? He immediately agreed, turned around, and rode away. Not long after, the rumbling sound of cannons could be heard. This was not the self-made field artillery of the 5-Star Army's military factory, but the sound of a 100 mm mortar. In comparison, it could hit a distance of more than 10 miles and could kill people. The shells landed behind the Hindustani army, causing great damage and completely disrupted Matuer's previous arrangement. He always thought that a 6-mile bombardment was the limit of the 5-Star Army. He thought that the place where he was standing was very safe. But who would have thought that there would be such powerful cannons? Seeing that the rear of the army had also been hit by the cannons and was in chaos, he said with a sorrowful expression, "Retreat, retreat all the way back to Vidal City." The Hindustani army, who had been in a passive position, finally admitted defeat under the great power of the mortars and the 5-Star Army's trump card. Fortunately, Matuer was decisive in his actions. Under his decisive command, 100,000 of the 300,000-strong army managed to escape back into the city. And this battle had basically crushed the Hindustani army's will to resist. The sky was finally bright. At this time, under Yang Qindong's command, the army basically joined the battle. But because the Hindustani army was already in a mess and had no strength to resist, most people were just capturing captives. The battlefield was big enough, there were enough enemies, there was a language barrier and very few people cooperated. The capture of captives actually took 2 days and 1 night. It was not until noon on the 3rd day after the battle began that the battlefield basically stopped. Yang Qindong looked at the report that had just been sent to him. In this battle, they had killed more than 70,000 enemies and captured nearly 130,000 enemies. He knew that the Hindustanis were about to be finished. Chapter 1549. In Bidar city, General Matuer led the defeated army back to the city, and Nehru was shocked when he heard the news. That was 300,000 people, even 300,000 pigs couldn't be slaughtered so quickly, right? Although Matuer had brought back 100,000 people, it still made Nehru very angry. He had hoped that the 300,000 men would hold off the 5-Star Army, and once the stalemate reached a certain point, he would look for an opportunity to counterattack. Now, he had lost 2/3 of his soldiers, and with the soldiers in the city, there were only 25 men left. How long could they hold off the 5-Star Army? Nehru was furious, and the consequences were severe. In front of all the generals and ministers, he ordered Matuer to be executed. Matuer didn't resist at all. He had fought the 5-Star Army twice in a row, and had lost twice. He no longer had the confidence to win against the Hans. Since that was the case, so be it. Death was release. After Nehru killed Mater, he personally took command. He wanted to bring the 250,000 soldiers in the city to fight a decisive battle with the 5-Star Army in Bidar city. This was also a national war. During this process, some people suggested that they should send people to negotiate with the 5-Star Army. At most, they would surrender to the other party and respect the other party as their suzerain. There were also people who suggested that they should continue to retreat. They could retreat to Gubaja city. If that didn't work, they could retreat to Bangalore. Speaking of which, India's territory was not small. However, these 2 points were rejected by Nehru in the end. Surrendering was impossible. He understood that in front of the five-star army, there was only the possibility of annihilation. There was no such thing as peace in exchange for surrender. Since they were going to be annihilated no matter what, they might as well give it a try before they die. As for retreating, where would they retreat to the day after tomorrow? Doing so would only cause the morale of the army to drop, and they wouldn't have a chance to fight the final battle. To be able to become the king of Hindustan, Nehru wasn't a coward. On the contrary, he was someone with great ambition. He was determined to fight the five-star army. He wanted to see how strong the other party was. For this, the first thing Nehru did was to boost the morale of the army. He announced the wealth he had brought from the capital to the public and explained how much money and benefits one could get from killing an enemy on the battlefield. This kind of open and transparent reward system had indeed boosted morale and stirred up the hearts of the people. In just 2 days, the 250,000 Indian soldiers in the city seemed to have been reborn, and some of them even showed signs of longing for war. On the 5th day, Yang Chindong led the main force of the army and appeared outside Vidal city. When he learned that King Nehru did not escape, but was prepared to fight to the death with him here, he was naturally very happy. He liked to fight, because it simplified complicated matters, it could buy him more time. And in order to fully respect this opponent, he was determined to show his ability, such as using the air force. He didn't try to understand the situation in the city. Although there were spies from the intelligence department in the city, they weren't equipped with radios and couldn't spread any news. And even without the support of intelligence, Yang Chindong could imagine that since Nehru didn't intend to leave, he must have made ample preparations and was waiting for Yang Chindong to attack the city. Since that was the case, let's see who's more powerful. On the first day outside the city, the air force couldn't take off due to the heavy rain. Yang Chindong endured for an entire day, which further boosted the morale of King Nehru. He shouted arrogantly that the five-star army wasn't invincible, and they were probably afraid of his army. This boosted the morale of the 250,000 soldiers in the city by a large margin. In such a situation, without the support of advanced weapons, it was really impossible for the 200,000 soldiers of the five-star army to take down Paidal city. In ancient times, the existence of a strong city would often deter the enemy. Sometimes, in order to take over a city, it was possible for the enemy to surround it for a few months, half a year, or even longer. That was also why the wise monarchs in ancient times had the desire to expand their territory, but were often unable to do so. But in Yang Chindong's eyes, all of that was nothing. The reason why he was able to lead his army to conquer such a large territory in just over a decade was because of the advantage brought by the large warehouse. He had advanced weapons that were far superior to those in this world, which was the greatest weapon that made him invincible and invincible. If it weren't for the fact that he didn't want to kill indiscriminately and that he needed to leave a lot of people behind to build his homeland, he could have formed an Air Force helicopter brigade, tank brigade, and war chariot brigade. Just think about it, if he took out those things, who in the world would be a match for him? This was especially true for those large-caliber cannons that could shoot up to tens of kilometers, hundreds of kilometers, or even more. If he really let them unleash their might, the enemy would often be destroyed before they even knew what they looked like. Yang Chindong did not do that. What he needed was to conquer, not destroy. At the same time, he also needed a powerful army for his use, not an army that only knew how to use the advantage of weapons to fight weak enemies. If that was really the case, what kind of combat power would this army have when he was no longer around? He did not use his strongest ability because he did not need to. Even if he did not use his strongest weapon, he could still conquer one country after another in a very short time, expand his territory, and instill the idea of Han supremacy in the world. Now that he had come to India, it was only natural that he wanted to occupy this place. From then on, India would perish, and this country and race would no longer exist in the world. From then on, there would no longer be any incidents of Indians rebelling against China. Before he conquered this place, he did not mind teaching them a lesson, making them remember him forever, so that they would tremble at the thought of the 5-star army, and lose their will to resist. When he thought of doing that, he had to deal them a heavy blow. Therefore, on the morning of the third day, when the sky cleared up and the sun hung high in the sky, the Air Force set off with an order. Over 100 hot air balloons soared into the air above Bidar city. At this time, on the city walls of Bidar, countless Indians were waiting in formation. Beside them, there were many temporary wooden huts. They were all made up of huge wooden sleepers, which were the preparations they had made to defend against the cannons. From the words of the 100,000 defeated soldiers, they knew that the cannons of the 5-star army were extremely powerful, and had a long range as well. Mater had lost in this aspect. Nehru came up with such a method after learning from the mistakes of his predecessors. Although it could not completely suppress the power of the cannons, at least when the cannons were fired, there would be a place to hide. Perhaps they could not avoid being injured or dying in battle, but it was better than nothing. When he thought that he had done all this, he would have the ability to compete with the 5-star army, or at least have the ability to fight a protracted war. But when he heard the exclamations of the soldiers, and saw the hot air balloons that had appeared above the city without him knowing, he was still shocked. What are these things? Nehru did not know, nor did he know what they were used for. But his intuition told him that these things must be very dangerous. After all, being able to fly in the sky was already a breakthrough in the thinking of many people. Because of the backward science, the ancients had always been in awe of the heavens. Before they could figure out whether the earth was round or square, the heavens were always in existence that they had to worship. But now, there were actually people who could fly in the sky. Just this statement alone made the eyes of many Hindustanis show fear. Although the stimulation of wealth did not cause any chaos, it was obvious that the morale of the army was greatly affected when they saw the hot air balloons floating in the sky. Although they did not know what these things floating in the sky were, they knew that they did not have these things, but the Han people did. As soon as the hot air balloons appeared, it attracted the attention of all the Hindustanis in the city. Not only were there 200,000 soldiers, but there were also more than 1 million civilians in the city. India was a large country with a large population at that time. As one of the largest cities in the country, Bidar city had long had more than 1 million civilians. This was also one of the reasons why Nehru was so confident. In his opinion, with so many civilians, as long as he did not suffer a crushing defeat, he could rise again at any time. Under the eyes of millions of people, the hot air balloons arrived above Bidar city. Then, a large number of wooden barrels filled with black oil fell from the sky like a fairy scattering flowers, falling toward Bidar city. Countless wooden barrels fell, but to the Hindustanis who did not know the power of the black oil, this did not make them feel anything. They only instinctively dodged. However, when the wooden barrels fell to the ground, a large amount of black oil poured out. Following that, many fire extinguishers fell from the sky and started a huge fire. That kind of scorching feeling and that kind of threatening fire caused many people to become alarmed and cry out loudly. Some of the kerosene fell on the city tower of Bidar city, and the fire immediately burst into flames. One after another, people shouted to put out the fire. The soldiers began to put out the fire with basins of water. This primitive method of putting out the fire naturally had no effect on the kerosene. Not only that, but the fire also became more vigorous in a short period of time because of the water. Many Hindustani soldiers were caught off guard and were burned by the fire, causing even more miserable screams. On the city tower, Nehru, who was protected by countless palace guards, stared at the scene in front of him with wide eyes, and his body trembled involuntarily. Chapter 1550. He knew that the 5-star army would have cannons to pave the way, and he was prepared to sacrifice some of his men. However, he believed that in the end, the siege still depended on people. As long as they could hold on until the 5-star army was blocked outside the city, it would be considered a victory. Under such a series of attacks, when both sides suffered casualties, the scales of victory would slowly tip towards him. After all, he was the king of India. If he was in trouble, the soldiers of other cities would not leave him in the lurch. Especially when they saw that he was in a stalemate with the 5-star army, the possibility of them sending reinforcements would greatly increase. When that time came, the 5-star army would not have any reinforcements. At that time, even if 2, 3, or even 5 people were sacrificed, the final victor would still be him. This was the reason why Nehru persisted until the end. He firmly believed that with the advantage of nearly 10 million people, he would definitely be able to drive the 5-star army out of the country. However, he never expected that the other party would start a fire, and it was the kind of fire that could not be extinguished at all. Perhaps the fire would not hurt many people, but the impact on the morale of the army was unimaginable. When all the soldiers lost their fighting spirit because of the fear of the fire, the 5-star army would charge at the right time. Who would be able to stop them? For this battle, he took out all his assets to reward everyone and raise the morale of the army. However, all of this was based on whether they could win and survive. And if they died in battle, what was the use of all the wealth? At this moment, Nehru finally felt fear. He did not know if the 5-star army had any other means that they had not used yet. Just a big fire had already left him at a loss. What would he do if there were other ways to attack? The fire continued to light up in the city and could not be extinguished. Anyone who came into contact with the flames would either die or be seriously injured without exception. It did not take long for the city to turn into a living hell. On the other hand, the 5-star army outside the city had no intention of attacking the city at all. On the contrary, they set up a formation to prevent the Hindustanis from launching a counterattack in desperation. After that, they began to cook. It didn't take long for the aroma of meat to drift into Vidal city. If it was any other time, the aroma of the meat would definitely make the Hindustanis, who could not even fill their stomachs, swallow their saliva. However, at this moment, all of them were vomiting non-stop. There was no other reason other than the fact that many people in the city had already been burned to death and turned into roasted meat. The smell they emitted was actually not much different from the smell of meat. How could it not make people want to vomit? "Young master, when do we attack?" Beta Persei asked curiously as he watched the fire burning everywhere in the city. "Don't worry. This Nehru clearly wants to fight us to the death. How can we let him have his way? Let's burn it for a few days first." Yang Qindong had a confident smile on his face. What he wanted was to exchange the greatest victory for the smallest price. He wanted to see how many more days these Hindustanis could last. Yang Qindong was neither in a hurry nor slow. He had no intention of attacking the city at all. Every day, he ordered the Air Force to drop black oil barrels into Vidal city. The fire was put out again and again, and after 5 days of this, the city that had been bustling with life had turned into scorched land. Wails and cries could be heard everywhere. Not only did the fire burn many Hindustani soldiers and civilians to death, but it also ignited the piles of food that were originally stored in the city. The water source was also greatly damaged due to the fire. Seeing that it would not be long before the city fell into a situation of food and water shortage even if the 5-star army did not attack the city, Nehru's face turned pale. He finally experienced the feeling of helplessness in the face of the 5-star army. He finally understood why the alliance army of nearly 1 million Khanates, which seemed so aggressive and powerful, would still be defeated by the 5-star army. This was an army that did not play by the rules, but at the same time, they had many trump cards up their sleeves. When faced with such an opponent, it was often impossible to guard against them. It was only natural that they would lose in the end. "Your Majesty, our rations can only last for another 10 days at most. We don't have much water left. If this goes on, we..." Finally, one of the generals asked Jawaharlal Nehru in a doubtful tone. "Kill those who incite the army's morale." Nehru did not even look at the general. He just waved his hand. Immediately, the palace guards rushed forward and beheaded the person who spoke. When the other ministers and generals saw this scene, they all shrunk their necks. Nehru wanted to use this method to tell everyone that there was only one path for them to take, and that was to resist to the end. As for those who had other thoughts, they should all go to hell. A general died because of one wrong sentence. This made the others not dare to say anything even if they had other thoughts. They could only hope that the reinforcements would appear, or a miracle would happen, and the five-star army would take the initiative to retreat. It was impossible to make the five-star army retreat. Since they came with such a large force, how could they retreat without destroying the Hindustani royal family and occupying this place? As for the reinforcements, no one was a fool. The strength of the five-star army was there for all to see. Unless one had enough confidence, who would easily get involved? What was the difference between that and taking the initiative to die? Days passed, and the fire continued to burn fiercely. Every day, the Air Force would come to Bidar city. Regarding this, the Hindustanis in the city went from being terrified at the beginning to being indifferent towards the end. They were used to it. But if one looked carefully, one would see that whether it was the soldiers or the civilians, all of them had a look of despair on their faces. Obviously, they were all prepared to die. They could not see any hope of survival. Ordinary soldiers and civilians would accept their fate. Or rather, their lives were cheap to begin with. If they died, then so be it. But the ministers, nobles, and generals in the city did not want to die. They had families. Some of them had wives and many children. How could they be willing to die just like that? Under the strong pressure, King Nehru's authority was no longer an existence that could suppress everything in their eyes. It was no longer an existence that made them tremble in fear. This was especially so for some of the more knowledgeable officials. The news that they received was that whenever the five-star army conquered a country, they would not kill anyone for no reason. On the contrary, those who surrendered and submitted to the Han people could still live with a tenth of their wealth. They just needed to move to another country. When this news was spread by the secret agents of the intelligence department in the city, and the nobles and people in power knew about it, some people were finally moved. Seeing that if they continued to resist, they would only die. They were unwilling and decided to save themselves. The so-called saving themselves referred to surrendering to the five-star army and seeking a way out for themselves. If they wanted to do this, they had to overthrow the mountain in front of them, King Nehru. Maybe the strength of a minister was limited, and the strength of a general was far from enough. But when everyone joined forces, their strength became very shocking. Under the silent collusion, more than 90% of the people in power had been united. In 1466 AD, in the 6th month, when Nehru was still sleeping, his subordinates rebelled and fought with his guards. In the end, Nehru personally went up and was killed in a chaotic battle. Along with King Nehru being killed, the generals and ministers who took over opened the city gates of Bidar and India surrendered. In the same month, Yang Qindong personally gave the order to establish the India province. The governor was the former 1st Cavalry Army 5th Division Commander Gong Fong. Considering that only the royal family of India was destroyed, there were many cities and armies that had not surrendered. As such, the Second Army was established. The commander was appointed by Governor Gong Fong, and the former Second Army Nyo Duo was under him. Gong Fong was appointed and quickly promoted. Apart from the fact that this person was indeed capable, as he was an all-rounder, which made Yang Qindong feel assured. Another important reason was that other senior officers were not willing to take on this position. For example, Tian Hu, the commander of the 1st Cavalry Army, was used to fighting and killing, especially the feeling of fighting with Yang Qindong. Letting him become the commander of the army seemed to be a promotion, but because of this, he was fixed in one place. This was something he was unwilling to do. There was also Wu Sheng, the commander of the 3rd Army, who also had this qualification. But a few years ago, he was thrown in Eastern Europe for 10 years. Those days were really hard. Facts also proved that he was a tiger general, not a good minister who ruled the country. There was no need to consider it. Finally, a new commander of the 3rd Army, like Su He, had enough experience and was brave enough to fight in the war. These years of military merit had already allowed him to join the Han nationality and become one of their own. But he was just a martial artist. He did not know many big words. Counting on him to revitalize and build a place, then forget it. In the end, it was Gong Feng's turn. Although this person did not even have the experience of being a commander, he was now directly appointed as the commander of the army. The promotion was a bit too fast. But don't forget, he was Yang Qindong's student. Whether it was loyalty or ability, he was a top-notch person. Since he had such an advantage, no one could say anything if he was promoted faster. Therefore, this heavy responsibility fell on Gong Feng's head. After receiving the appointment, he knelt in front of Yang Qindong with tears in his eyes. While thanking Yang Qindong for his kindness, he also said that he would do his best to pacify the whole of India, and then seize the time to build and strive for self-sufficiency as soon as possible. He would do his part to strengthen Yang Qindong. At the end of June 1466 AD, King Wunan of Damyang Yang Qindong led the main army out of India and went straight to the city of Lahore in the north. Chapter 1551. Sultanate, Delhi. When the news of the Indian King Nehru's men being killed and the five-star army occupying the heavily defended city of Bidar without sacrificing a single soldier reached Delhi, King Lodi was truly terrified. The way he saw it, even if the Indian army was no match for the five-star division, they would at least be able to hold on for a few years. That way, he would have sufficient time to make preparations. Whether it was recruiting a new army, expressing goodwill to the Han people, or even choosing a place to escape, there would be a path he could take. Who would have thought that the seemingly strong Indian army would be so weak that they would be completely wiped out in just over half a year? Even King Nehru himself couldn't protect himself and was killed by his subordinates. With this lesson in mind, Lodi was extremely fearful of the five-star army. He was even more afraid that he would be betrayed by his subordinates and be beheaded when the enemy's soldiers arrived at the city gates. After careful consideration, he handed over the letter of surrender before the five-star army could attack him. He was willing to hand over the entire Delhi Sultanate to King Wunan of Damyang. He only asked for a place to spend his remaining years in peace and for the other party to spare his army and people. By the time Yang Qindong arrived at Lahore after spending nearly 2 months, the Sultan's letter of surrender had also arrived. Yang Qindong, of course, accepted it with a smile. He then led his army straight into the Sultanate and entered the capital of Delhi. Outside the city gates of Delhi, Lodi changed out of his royal robes and wore the plain clothes of a commoner. He knelt in front of the city gates and handed over the king's seal and the tiger-moving seal to Yang Qindong in front of all the officials and commoners. He stayed in Delhi for 5 days and comforted Lodi. He also said that he would send him to Chichen city, where the weather was pleasant and the living facilities were good. It was the best place to spend his remaining years in peace. After that, he met with some of the officials in the country and won over many of their hearts. In the 9th month of 1466, he led the main force of the army out of Delhi, passed through Kanauj, Jabuna River, and arrived at the border city of Benares. His army then arrived at the border city of Sadpur in the Barangi kingdom. At this time, the nobles of Bangra were also panicking. India was destroyed and the Delhi Sultanate surrendered. The situation had changed so quickly that it was beyond their expectations. If it was half a year ago, who would have thought that the five-star army would be so powerful that even the barriers behind them, India and the Delhi Sultanate, which they thought were the safest, had been taken down one by one? Now, Bangla, who was originally at the rear, had become the front line. They had to face the five-star army head-on. Did they have the ability to do so? Before the main force of the five-star army could do anything to Sadpur city, 2 different voices were heard in Dhaka city. One wanted to surrender, while the other wanted to fight. Most of them were descending. It was clear that Bangla, with a population of less than 3 million and an area much smaller than India, was truly afraid. They might be able to take advantage of the fact that the five-star army was not paying attention to them to take advantage of them. However, when the five-star army treated them like a piece of cake and wanted to deal with them, their fear would appear in their bones. As the king, Abdul's power was not completely centralized. The power he inherited from his father, Mar ad-Din, was not complete. There were even some voices in the country that looked down on him. Him sending troops to Myanmar was also a means to divert everyone's attention. He hoped to use this opportunity to win a few battles to lay his foundation and let everyone know that he was not inferior to his father. On the contrary, he was even stronger. His train of thought was correct. Usually, a new king would use some external methods to settle internal matters and achieve the goal of centralizing power. However, the bad thing was that they should not have chosen the 5-star army as their opponent. Now that they had attracted the attention of this lion, even Abdul was afraid. After learning that the Sultanate had surrendered, Abdul immediately wrote a letter to General Rajiv, who was fighting in Burma. He explained the situation at the rear and asked him to ask for help from the great Ming dynasty's third provincial king, Zhu Huiyun. No matter what, he had to help him. Otherwise, with Bangla's strength, he would not be a match for the 5-star army, who had the strongest firearms. Unfortunately, after writing the letter, it was like a stone sinking into the sea. There was no reply. It was not that Rajiv did not inform Zhu Huiying. Instead, it was that Zhu Huiying could not even protect himself. How could he have the strength to support Bangla? Previously, the matter of the two sides working together to divide the Yang faction's territory seemed like a joke now. Perhaps Abdul trusted Zhu Huiying too much and fell for his trap. He attracted such a powerful enemy like the 5-star army. It could be imagined that since they were the ones who made the first move, it was time for them to return the favor with a kick. It was just that Yang Xie's territory was big, and his strength was strong. He could take a few kicks like nothing happened, but Bangla was too small. How could they withstand a kick from the 5-star army? Tell Zhu Huiyun that if he doesn't send reinforcements, I will also surrender to the 5-star army like the Sultan. At that time, I will also tell King Wu Nan of the great Ming dynasty about his previous promise. He can just wait to be burned by the flames of anger. Abdul, who was furious, said sternly to the newly sent messenger. He just wanted to put on a threatening appearance. If he did not do so, he was afraid that Zhu Huiying would not help him with all his strength. But what Abdul did not expect was that this threat would cause him to lose his life in the end. On the 7th day after he sent out the new emissary, a group of relatively short and serious people came from outside the palace of Bangra. When they appeared at the back door of the palace, they were welcomed in. The palace that was usually tightly guarded was now like an open park in front of these people. There were no secrets to be kept. That night, it was these people who changed into night clothes and quietly appeared outside King Abdul's palace. In the night, these people moved like lightning and were as swift as the wind. The 20 palace guards waiting outside were not even a match for these people in black. In less than half an incense's time, they were all killed. When the leader of the black-clothed people appeared beside the king's bed, Abdul seemed to have sensed something and slowly opened his eyes. "Who are you? Who are you?" When he opened his eyes, he saw a black figure standing in front of him. Out of instinct, Abdul could not help but exclaim. But after that, he felt a chill on his neck. It was as if something was flowing out of his body. Then, all the strength in his body began to be sucked away, bit by bit. Abdul was dead. He died on his bed. Along with the queen, her personal maids, and dozens of guards. The king died from an assassination. It was only in the middle of the night when another shift of guards came to take over the shift. Once this was out, the already anxious people of Dhaka city became even more chaotic. In the middle of the night, the entire palace was brightly lit. Many people were shouting to catch the assassins. But obviously, they did not even know the exact time of the king's death. How could they catch the assassins? And in less than an hour, a group of black figures left the palace. When they left, the leader of the black-clothed people stopped in his tracks. His eyes revealed a cruel and smug smile. Under the moonlight, one could see a pair of small triangular eyes. If Yang Qindong was here, he would definitely recognize him. He was one of the special ninjas of the Japanese Empire who was on his death list. Sadpur City. When Yang Qindong led the 5-star army to the city, the general guarding the city sent out a messenger. The general idea was that the king intended to surrender, but what should he do? He still needed to discuss with the ministers, so he needed some time. He hoped that the 5-star army could wait for a few days. Facing the messenger, Yang Qindong did not feel anything wrong. India was destroyed just like that. The king of India died because of it. Then, the king of Delhi Sultanate surrendered. Now, it was Bangla's turn. It was reasonable for them to choose to surrender. Yang Qindong could understand the situation. He told the messenger that he could wait for a few days. He didn't even threaten the other party to not play any tricks. Facing the 5-star army, who had absolute strength, delaying the battle for a few days wouldn't have any effect. So he wasn't worried that the other party would play such tricks. It should be that Abdul really needed time to discuss with the ministers. After all, the surrender of a country was not a small matter for a country. While waiting, 7 days passed. Sadpur city's defense became even tighter. There were also many soldiers on the city tower. Although they knew that their arrows couldn't hit the 5-star army's camp 5 miles away from the city, the soldiers still drew their bows and put on an attitude of, "If you dare to come, I dare to shoot." The situation suddenly became tense. This naturally didn't escape the eyes of the scouts. When the situation was reported back to Yang Qindong, he was also confused. He couldn't understand why Bangla's soldiers suddenly became tough. Could it be that they have something to rely on? This doubt was quickly solved. Just like the intelligence personnel in India, the intelligence personnel in the small country of Bangla also didn't enjoy the treatment of having a radio station. So they used people to transmit the news, which made the news less effective. But in the end, the result was still in front of Yang Qindong. Abdul was assassinated. The king of a country was assassinated. It was no wonder that the soldiers of Bangla were so nervous. Who did it? After seeing this news, Yang Qindong's always confident eyes flashed with ruthlessness. Chapter 1552. The assassination order was definitely not given by him, and without his order, no one would dare to do it. Moreover, to assassinate the king of a country in a heavily guarded palace without being discovered afterwards was not something an ordinary person could do. Even in the entire Yangtze, even the spies of the intelligence department's action team couldn't do it. Only people like the Wolf Fang Special Forces, who have been specially trained in beheading operations, could do it. Of course, the high-level ninjas of the Japanese Empire could also do this if they had an insider. In Yang Qindong's eyes, without his order, these two armies wouldn't dare to act without orders. Then who could be the murderer? What good would killing King Abdul do to the person who did it? Yang Qindong, who was puzzled, was really puzzled. This sudden incident was not as simple as the killing of a king. At least, it showed that there was a dark hand behind the scenes that he couldn't see or didn't know about. Since they had the ability to kill King Abdul, then could they also pose a threat to his safety? Of course, Yang Qindong was now at the level of a grandmaster, and he had Okura's protection. Unless someone could kill him in an instant, there would be no chance. But this didn't mean that his family would be safe. Beta Persei immediately sent a report to Yang Wu and asked him to increase the security level of the Resin City Palace. Although he didn't think of the reason, it was necessary to take precautions. Understood. Beta Persei also thought of something, and his expression changed drastically, then he turned and went to the telegraph office. Yang Qindong was left alone in the tent, and he was silent for a long time. With Okura's help, there was really no one in the world that could make him feel afraid. If there was one, it would be the people in the dark. Because such a person, you don't know who they are, what kind of means they will use, and what kind of method they will appear in front of you. If he made a mistake and fell into the other party's trap, he would have to pay a heavy price. This was especially true for his family and children in the palace. If any of them were hurt, Yang Qindong would not be able to accept it psychologically. In his previous life, he was an orphan. Other than the military and he had no other relatives. But in this life, he had these family members, so as a man, he had to protect them well. Anyone who wanted to harm them would have to go through him first. Otherwise, if they suffered any losses, even if he found the culprit and tore him into pieces, it would be too late for regrets. It would not be enough to make up for everything. Who? Yang Qindong, who had been sitting for a long time, slowly stood up. He had already decided to let Yang San investigate this matter personally. At the same time, he had also arranged for the members of the Lengia Special Forces to be hidden outside the palace of Resin City as an extra layer of insurance. At this moment, he suddenly felt like there was a dagger at his back. But no matter what kind of feelings he had, the problem of Bangla still had to be solved. Their king, Abdul, was assassinated. Presumably, everyone would think that he was the culprit. If that was the case, it would be impossible to reclaim this place peacefully. After all, how could the five-star army, which even their king could not tolerate, gain the trust of Bangla's officials and generals? Since peaceful means could not solve the problem, then they would fight. Fight until the opponent was afraid, until the opponent surrendered, until Bangla was destroyed. They were the ones who attacked Yangtze's Myanmar province first. Now, it was time for them to pay the price. If they were not convinced, then they would fight until they were convinced. If they did not surrender, then they would fight until they surrendered. The death of King Abdul could not stop the advance of the five-star army. Early the next morning, the 2nd and 4th divisions of the Cold Front Division were fully armed and arrived at the outskirts of Sadpur city. When they were 3 miles away, the cannons roared and shells whizzed through the air towards the 5 city towers. After a round of cannon fire, the city walls collapsed. Using this opportunity, the 1st Cavalry Army and the new army's elite cavalry attacked from the left and right respectively. Sadpur city fell. This battle seemed to be very easy. But that was only because of the advantage of the firearms. In fact, it was not that there was no resistance at all. For example, when the 2 cavalry armies charged into the city, they encountered a lot of resistance. Especially after entering the city, there would be people shooting arrows from the dark corners from time to time. Because of this, both cavalry armies suffered casualties, especially the new army. Just after entering the city, the number of soldiers killed and injured exceeded 2,000. For the new army, this was already a defeat. Such a large number of casualties made them too ashamed to face anyone, let alone report the losses to Yang Qindong. But how could Yang Qindong, who always had full control of the army, not know? After listening to Beta Persei's report, he only replied with a cold expression, understood. Although it seemed like there was nothing else to say, in the following siege battle, the artillery fire of the Cold Front Division became even fiercer. Not only that, the air force was also used. Fire burned the various cities belonging to Bangra. It was as if wherever the army went, there would be wails, corpses, and scorched earth. This was Yang Qindong's revenge for the resistance of the Bangra people. Weren't you willing to shoot arrows from the back? Fine, I won't even give you the chance to do so. When are you going to blow up the city and burn it again? Only when you have no place to hide will we enter the city. Not only that, along the way, the Bangra generals who resisted the five-star army were all skinned alive and wrapped in grass. No matter if it was a dead general or a living general, it was the same. In this battle, the five-star army had shown their cruel side, completely changing the image of the Han people in the eyes of others. They were magnanimous and kind. Yang Qindong never showed mercy to his enemies. Yang Qindong always said to everyone that if one repaid evil with good, how would one repay good? If you are not kind, I will not be righteous. If you can do it on the first day, I will do it on the 15th day. In the end, let's see who is afraid. The kindness of the Han people had always been given to those who had the intention to correct their mistakes and were kind-hearted. As for those kind and black-hearted jackals, forget it. Against them, Yang Qindong had plenty of hunting rifles in his hands. Regarding Yang Qindong's decision, none of the generals in the army objected. Firstly, they were used to seeing life and death, and knew that being kind to the enemy was being cruel to oneself. They knew that if the enemy was not eliminated, it would be harmful to oneself. Secondly, this time, it was Bengra who attacked Myanmar first, so it was time to teach them a lesson. It was like when someone punched you, but because of the limited strength, the punch did not kill you. Now that it was your turn, of course, you had to use as much strength as you could. Thirdly, which was also the most important point. Everyone trusted Yang Qindong. Over the years, his position and authority in the army was unchallenged. His words were like the truth, and everyone was used to obeying. With the above 3 points, Yang Qindong's orders were naturally carried out with all their might. However, just because the army did not have any objections, it did not mean that the civil officials did not have any opinions. For some reason, this matter spread to Chichen City, as well as some other provinces under Yang Xie's control. It attracted the opposition of some officials and a few scholars. In their view, the Han people were the masters of the world. Since that was the case, they should have a tolerant attitude towards their friends. Especially those who had not been enlightened, they should be more reasonable. Once they knew the etiquette, they would not go against the Han army. What's more, this time, it was April who was assassinated first. As his subjects, it was normal for them to retaliate. These rumors were also gathered by the intelligence department and reported to Yang Qindong. This made Beta Persei, who was on the side, curse on the spot. These scholars, to think that they keep talking about those who know the truth and the sage's principles. Don't they even know right from wrong? That bullshit King Abu was not killed by us at all. He was about to surrender, how could we kill him? It was obvious that someone was trying to frame him. How can these people be the accomplices of a villain? Yang Qindong agreed with Beta Persei's words. It was impossible to say that he was not angry. He was fighting and killing on the front lines, risking his life at all times to bring glory to the Han people and let them live a good life. Now, they had taken advantage of him and were still acting obedient. What magnanimity, they really did not know fear. With anger in his heart, he curiously looked at the list of names from the intelligence department. He wanted to see who was on it and who he was familiar with. Not to mention the list, he really saw a few familiar faces. For example, the Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Ethnic Affairs, Dong Chuanfu, and the Deputy Director of the Ministry of Grain, Yen Lianshui. These two people, because their positions were not low and their positions were very important, their names left some impression in Yang Qindong's heart. As for the others, he didn't care. They were just some unknown names that couldn't arouse his interest in the slightest. The list also recorded some of their opinions. The most important thing was that they were the Celestial Empire and were a country of etiquette, so they should help some small countries. How could the army do such a cruel thing? Yang Qindong only laughed coldly at this. In his eyes, these people were not real scholars. From Yang Qindong's point of view, a true scholar was not only a scholar who could write essays and recite poems, but also a person whose essays were creative and thoughtful. Moreover, they were also people who had humanistic feelings and social sciences. Moreover, real scholars were people who were the most serious, full of a sense of justice, and who cherished their own reputation the most. Jumping out like a group of jumping clowns, belittling others to elevate themselves, pretending to be virtuous, fishing for compliments, and looking down on others, such people could not be called scholars. They could only be called a group of arrogant and shameless pseudo-scholars. Chapter 1553. Thinking about it, they were quite pitiful. Because they had low self-esteem, were reclusive, and were not accepted by the world, they could only use such claptrap and lowly methods to attract the public's attention. If it was just to attract the public's attention, Yang Qindong was not willing to comment on it. He had a lot of things to do in a day, and there were also a lot of things that needed to be decided by him. He did not have the time and energy to pay attention to these people who did not have a strong sense of existence. However, they should not have attacked the military. This touched Yang Qindong's bottom line. Yang Qindong's way of ruling the country was not complicated. It could even be said that it was somewhat simple. In order to better manage the areas under his rule, he would give the civil officials great power. He only needed to divide the work. As for the more detailed work, he would let the people under him do it. He only needed to wait and see the results. If the results were good, he would continue to use them. If the results were not good, or if it proved that the person was not capable, he would just replace them. Sometimes, he would even indulge the civil officials. This was a form of respect for them, and also a strategy to manage the country. After all, the civil officials were important. As long as they were given what they needed, these people would work hard for him. This could solve many of the troubles of a monarch. He could indulge the civil officials, but there was one thing that no one could touch. Even if it was an important official or an indispensable existence in the eyes of others, it was still not allowed. This matter was related to the transfer of military authority in the army. Looking at the history of the dynasties, the reason why the founding monarchs were always at the same level was because they enjoyed the supreme ability to transfer military power. In the later years of the dynasty, due to various needs of balance, the monarchs had to give up military power and began to play all kinds of tricks with the civil officials. By doing so, it seemed that they could hold great power and know everything about the country. However, if they neglected the importance of military power, the final result was that the civil officials could control the military. Once they met a strong opponent, they would not even have the power to fight back. Moreover, a monarch who did not hold military power could not gain the respect of his subjects. After all, if he did not have any means to intimidate them, why should they be afraid of him? Yang Qindong, who understood this principle and saw through its essence, firmly grasped the military power in his hands. In this way, he had the power to change the situation at any time, hanging a sword of Damocles over the heads of the civil officials. As such, they had no choice but to obey. Not only did Yang Qindong do this, but his descendants also had to do this in the future. In this way, they would not have to worry about the collapse of the country. Even if something irreversible happened, at least they would have the ability to protect themselves. With such understanding and deep thinking, how could Yang Qindong change his decision just because of the clamor of some scholars? Since the policy had been set, it would not be easily changed. Not only that, Yang Qindong did not intend to let go of those scholars who were clamoring and picking on him. Not to mention that he was a person who would not rub sand in his eyes, but he was still able to distinguish between right and wrong. What? You're eating my salary and living in the house that I built. How dare you come back and criticize me? With Yang Qindong's authority and influence in Yangxia, they were already so presumptuous. It could be imagined that if his descendants were in this position, they would be even more rampant, right? If it was a more cowardly heir, wouldn't he be eaten by these so-called scholars? If he did not find something for these people to do and let them know that the horse lord had 3 eyes, he was afraid that such things would only happen more and more in the future. Beta Persei, send a telegram to City Lord Yu Qian and Yang Wu. Pick out the people on the list and let them form a temporary diplomatic group. Allow them to go to the camp of the king of the 3 provinces, Zhu Huiyun. Also, tell them that I can do as they say without using a sword or a spear. Then, I need them to influence the king of the 3 provinces, and let them urge and force Zhu Huiyun to surrender unconditionally immediately. Otherwise, no one can guarantee what the consequences will be. Beta Persei took notes with a pen at the side, but as he wrote, he laughed out loud. This was clearly a means for the young master to deal with these scholars. It was simply impossible to make the other party surrender unconditionally. The king of the 3 provinces, Zhu Huiyun, who had hundreds of thousands of soldiers, was not the kind of person who would wait for death. If he was, he would not have harmed his eldest brother and 3rd brother to seize power. However, in Beta Persei's view, this was a good thing. Who asked those scholars to criticize the army when they had nothing better to do? Did they really think that they were in the Ming dynasty? Did they really think that they were those imperial censors who could make a rumor about anything, and even if there was an accident, they would not be blamed for it? Now, I'm asking you to negotiate with Zhu Huiyun, the person who killed his brother. If you have anything to say, you can say it to him. But remember to be careful. Don't provoke the other party and end up angering him. If that happens, even the gods won't be able to save you. When Beta Persei was trying hard to hold back his laughter, Yang Qindong spoke again. Send a telegram to Deputy City Lord Luan Shaochen. Tell him to keep an eye on this matter. If anyone on this list dares to not go, they will be stripped of their official position and will never be employed again. Their descendants will also not be able to be officials for 3 generations. Yang Qindong was worried that these people would play tricks when they saw the real move, so he came up with such a punishment system. Don't underestimate these so-called scholars who boasted of being virtuous and virtuous. Pick out one of them and put them in the future, they would all be at the level of emperors. Especially when it came to pretending to be dead, they were all top-notch experts. If they didn't set some bottom lines, they would really come up with all kinds of tricks. The telegram flew straight to Crimson City and soon appeared on the desk of the City Lord of Crimson City, Yu Qian. Not only that, but Deputy City Lord Luan Shaochen and Yang Wu of the Yang family also received the same telegram. The telegram was made public and had no intention of keeping it a secret. In just half a day, the news had spread everywhere. Dong Chuanfu, who was named in the telegram, had a gloomy expression on his face. In his office, Yan Lianshui, the deputy director of the grain department, was crying and complaining with tears and snot running down his face. Elder Dong, they clearly don't see eye to eye with us. They think we're talking too much and want to make an example out of us. As our leader, you must speak out against it. I don't want to face the king of the 3 provinces. I heard that this person even killed his brothers. He's a demon king. Yan Lianshui fully displayed his acting skills as an award-winning actor. His face was full of pitiful, and tears flowed freely from his eyes. Those who didn't know would think that he had suffered a great grievance. When he said this, Dong Chuanfu's face became even uglier. What did he mean by being the leader? He wasn't going to take the blame for this. Thus, he said coldly, Deputy Director Yan, pay attention to your status. This matter was voluntary from the beginning to the end. No one forced anyone, let alone being the leader. After this reminder, Yan Lianshui realized that he had said something wrong and quickly corrected himself. Yes, Elder Dong is right. We were willing. However, our intentions were good. We didn't want to see the 5-star army brutally kill people. There's nothing wrong with this. Now, you want us, the civil officials, to persuade the king of the 3 provinces to surrender? This is an impossible task. Perhaps we won't be able to return. Elder Dong, you are someone whose city lord you personally wrote a letter to invite. You have a lot of face, so you must report this matter truthfully. This time, Dong Chuanfu didn't say anything to refuse. He was indeed summoned by Yu Qian from the southern Ming dynasty. At that time, he was just an unsuccessful 7th-rank imperial censor in the southern Ming dynasty. He was getting older and was about to die. At this time, Yu Qian sent someone to deliver a letter to him. He thought about the current situation and saw that Bugnam of Gojoseon was going to replace the great Ming dynasty. Thus, he made the decision to join the southern Ming dynasty and become the deputy chief. In reality, it wasn't just Dong Chuanfu. In the entire Yang Xie dynasty, there were many people like him. They were all invited by Yu Qian or their colleagues who had been officials in the Great Ming dynasty. However, these people had a common characteristic. Whether it was in the southern Ming dynasty or in Baiming, they were the type of people who weren't used in important positions. Otherwise, they wouldn't have abandoned their families and come to the Yang Xie dynasty. After all, in the eyes of many people, the Great Ming dynasty was the orthodox. Dong Chuanfu, who was personally invited by Yu Qian, was very proud of himself. Relying on this, even the head of the Ministry of Ethnic Affairs, his immediate superior, was rarely in his eyes. Now that something had happened, he naturally had to ask Yu Qian for help. All right, I'll go look for City Lord Yu now. All of you just stay here quietly and don't say anything that goes too far. Dong Chuanfu stood up from behind the desk and tidied up his clothes. Under Yan Lianshui's admiring gaze, he walked out of the office. The main responsibility of the Ethnic Affairs Department was to adjust the conflicts between the various ethnic groups in order to achieve harmony. In the end, they would eliminate the barriers and become one family. Just from this point alone, it was a very important department. When Yu Qian recommended Dong Xuanfu for the position of deputy minister, he had high hopes. He believed that with this person's ability, he would be able to do things well. Therefore, as someone who was valued by Yu Qian, Dong Xuanfu didn't need to make an appointment to see the city lord. When the staff of the city lord's manor saw Dong Xuanfu appear, they first greeted him with a smile. Then, with the excuse that the city lord was still busy and needed to wait for a while, they invited him to a nearby lounge. Dong Xuanfu didn't think too much at first, but after staying for more than 2 hours, his expression became a bit ugly. In particular, he hadn't seen anyone pour tea for him in such a long time. How could he not know that he was being ignored? Chapter 1554. Thinking about it, he was just called by Yang Qindong. Although on the surface it was said that he was entrusted with an important task, anyone with a clear mind could see that there was clearly a problem. At this time, who wouldn't stay away from him? How could anyone take the initiative to approach him? This was the official scene. When he was proud, he was surrounded by flowers. When he was frustrated, he was surrounded by holes. Sigh. After a sigh, Dong Xuanfu knew that his situation was a bit dangerous, but the more it was like this, the more he had to find Yu Qian and argue with him. Otherwise, he would really be finished. He got up, strode out of the lounge, and went straight to the floor of the city lord mansion. During this period, although there were staff members stopping him, he really ignored them until he pushed the door upstairs. He didn't even knock on the door, which was enough to show the anger in Dong Xuanfu's heart now. When he pushed the door in, he saw Yu Qian wearing a pair of reading glasses and looking down at something. When the two looked at each other, Yu Qian showed a puzzled look. "Yinghai, why are you here?" Yinghai was Dong Xuanfu's name. Usually, only familiar people would call him like this. When Dong Xuanfu saw Yu Qian's stunned expression, he knew that the people below must not have reported his arrival. Thinking that it was not that Yu Qian didn't want to see him, the anger in his heart also subsided a lot. However, the staff behind him, seeing Dong Xuanfu break into the city lord's office without any etiquette, couldn't help but show a helpless look on his face. He seemed to want to explain something to Yu Qian. These staff members of the city lord mansion had long been convinced by Yu Qian's feelings and work attitude for the country. This time, they also knew that Dong Xuanfu came to ask for help. In order to reduce some pressure on Yu Qian, they acted on their own initiative and didn't want to arrange a meeting. Who was Yu Qian? His brain was very flexible. No one said anything, just the situation in front of him, he guessed most of it. He also knew that the staff members were doing this for his own good, but since he was here, he couldn't just kick him out. He had to see him anyway, so he waved his hand and said to the staff members, "You can leave, I will have a good chat with Yinghai." The staff had no choice but to withdraw, but there were still some discerning people who went to the office of the deputy city lord, Wan Shaochen, on the lower floor. After the office door was closed, Yu Qian stood up and personally poured a cup of tea for Dong Xuanfu. Then, he sat down on the sofa in the reception area. "Yinghai, you already know." In public. Dong Xuanfu raised his head and wanted to say something. However, Yu Qian waved his hand and said, "Yinghai, you were too reckless this time. You don't know what happened at all. You just listened and believed some things that you shouldn't have said. Now that the king is angry, the consequences are very serious." Since Yu Qian had spoken such serious words, Dong Xuanfu's face immediately fell. He just wanted to make his presence known and increase his fame and influence. One had to know that he had often used this method in the Great Ming and Southern Ming dynasty. Usually, you would only be promoted if you had enough influence. Then, you would have a smooth career path. However, he never expected that the same method would lead to such a disaster in Yangxie. It would be a lie to say that Dong Xuanfu didn't regret it. Therefore, he opened his mouth and said, "In public, I know my mistake. Please save me." Sigh. Yu Qian, who had always taken good care of his colleagues, shook his head helplessly. This time, when such a thing happened, Yang Qindong didn't send a telegram to the city lord's residence to deal with it. Instead, he directly explained the way to deal with it. Moreover, he also informed Yang Wu and Luan Shaoqian. This made it impossible for him, the city lord, to say anything. Who was Yang Wu? He was one of the 5 generals of the Yang family. The entire Bugnam of Gojoseon Palace's security was in his hands. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that when Yang Qindong wasn't in Qiqian City, all the people who were loyal to Yang Xie had to listen to him. Sometimes, his words were even more effective than the city lord's residence. Who was Luan Shaoqian? He wasn't just Yang Qindong's brother-in-law. He was also a 2-time provincial governor and had more than 10 years of experience in governing a place. His ability wasn't inferior to Yu Qian's. If it wasn't for the fact that he was still young and didn't have enough experience, he might even be able to replace Yu Qian's position as the city lord. Even so, Luan Shaoqian was seen as the most popular candidate to succeed Yu Qian. Once Yu Qian was old and had to retire, it would be time for this person to take over. It was to the point that some of the young staff in the city lord's residence looked to him as their leader. With the help of these 2 people, Yu Qian didn't have much room to maneuver. In addition, he was also leaning towards Yang Qindong's decision. What happened at the front, most people at the back only had a rough idea. However, for someone with a high position like him, he naturally knew a lot more details. Someone killed King Abdul of Bangla and framed the 5-star army for it. In the following battle, the entire country retaliated, which caused Yang Qindong to be angry. He also didn't want his soldiers to be hurt by hidden arrows, which was why he carried out such a cruel massacre. In the end, this was a military strategy. Everyone wanted to obtain the most benefits with the least losses. It wasn't clear who was right or wrong. But now, someone actually went to command the 5-star army and blamed Yang Qindong. And the person who blamed was Yang Xie's subordinate. It would be strange if Bugnam of Gojoseon wasn't angry. Since he knew the cause and effect of this matter, whether it was for public or private reasons, Yu Qian wouldn't stop this matter. If the person involved wasn't Dong Chuanfu, who he had worked hard to win over from the southern Ming Empire, he wouldn't even care about this. Even if he did care, with Yu Qian's personality, he would just tell the truth and do the work of the other party. As for personal reasons, he didn't even want to think about it. Yu Qian wasn't that kind of person. In history, if he was willing to go along with other people, his family wouldn't be unable to even afford a coffin after his death. He even needed to take care of the embroidered uniform guards in the future. Inghai, no one can help you with this matter. You have to think of a way to save yourself and complete the mission the king gave you. Yu Qian thought about it and felt that this was the only way. When he heard that he had to complete the mission and meet the king of the 3 provinces, Zhu Huitong, he was afraid that it would be disastrous. Immediately, Dong Chuanfu said with a sad face, in public, this is a 90% chance of death. Even if it's a 90% chance of death, so what? You still have to go. Yu Qian's face suddenly became serious as he spoke with a firm voice. In history, this person didn't take personal life and death seriously. When the Great Ming's wooden fortress was defeated and Yeshen of Walla led his troops, everyone was in a panic. Some people even thought about moving the capital to Nanjing. Only he stood up without hesitation. In the end, he was the one who turned the tide. How could such a person be afraid of death? As long as he thought that something was worth doing, even if he was in the vortex of death, he wouldn't frown. After being refuted by Yu Qian, Dong Chuanfu knew that he had no other choice. He couldn't not go. If he didn't go, he would be removed from his position. Not only that, his descendants wouldn't be allowed to become officials for 3 generations. In that case, the entire Dong family would be harmed by him. He didn't want to be the sinner of the family. Then I'll go. Dong Chuanfu sighed in his heart and finally made a decision. Go. At worst, he would die. If that was the case, he believed that with this merit, his descendants would also be touched by the glory. He could be considered to have done his last bit for the family. Yu Gong, it's hard to predict whether this trip will be good or bad. If something happens, I'll have to trouble Yu Gong to take care of my family. You can rest assured that after you leave, your family won't be bullied by anyone. Besides, with our Yang Xie's current ability, the 3 provincial kings won't dare to do anything to you unless they don't want to live. At the end of his words, Yu Qian's voice involuntarily rose a lot. This was his biggest gain after following Yang Qindong for so many years. That was, he could speak with confidence and was no longer afraid of being attacked by others. Because they didn't find trouble with others, it was already fortunate. On the first floor, someone had already reported to Wan Shaochen that Dong Chuanfu had appeared and went to find Yu Qian. In this regard, Wan Shaochen just smiled and said that he understood. Then he went to do what he needed to do. Although he hadn't been in the city lord's mansion for too long, he still understood Yu Qian. This was not a person who was biased. This was something that Yang Qindong said in a very serious tone. Since it was Yang Qindong who said it, Wan Shaochen naturally didn't have any doubts. Wan Shaochen believed that City Lord Yu Qian would be able to handle this matter well. The facts also proved that Dong Chuanfu left not long after and returned home. He ordered people to pack his luggage, as if he was going to go on a long journey to the place of the 3 provincial kings. Yang Qindong didn't pay too much attention to what happened in Crimson City. He left the matter to Yu Qian, Yang Wu, and Wan Shaochen. If it wasn't done well, then wouldn't it mean that the Yang Xie had no one to use? Not paying attention to Crimson City, his eyes were more focused on the Bangla Kingdom. After showing a strong attitude and putting it into action, the so-called revenge for the king became quieter and quieter. No one wasn't afraid of death, especially this King Abdul who didn't treat his people well. After resisting for a few days and paying a huge price, they finally became obedient. When the main force of the 5-star army appeared in front of some cities, even more people chose to surrender for their own safety. Faced with the Bangla army that suddenly became docile, the 5-star army naturally didn't start a brutal massacre. They acted as if those who surrendered could live and everyone would be fine. As a result, their progress became even faster. In the 12th month of 1466 AD, they arrived at the capital of Bangla, Dhaka city. Here, General Caldel presented his letter of surrender. From then on, this place became one of the territories under Yang Xie's control. Chapter 1555. In the palace of Dhaka city, Yang Qindong admired the scenery under the guidance of General Caldel. In the great hall of the palace, Yang Qindong sat high up on the throne and listened to the surrendered general talk about the current situation in Bangra. Ever since King Abdul was assassinated, the situation in the country had been chaotic beyond control. Various factions had emerged. Among them were the Avengers, the Warmongers, those who wanted peace, and those who only cared about themselves. Before this, the 5-star army had come with fury and forced the Vengeance faction and the War faction to abandon their weapons and armor. Now, they were either dead, injured, or fleeing. They could no longer pose a threat. Otherwise, Caldel, the general of the peace faction, wouldn't have submitted his letter of surrender. However, the Warmongers still existed and they were all generals with military power. For example, Rajiv, who was still causing trouble in Burma, was a representative of this group. According to Caldel, other than Rajiv, Azad and General Hark each led 10,000 soldiers into Burma from Bangra. They would probably cause some damage. Yang Qindong looked at Caldel's lowered head in self-reproach. He didn't intend to scold him. This had nothing to do with him. It was already a great deed for him to represent Dhaka in surrendering to the 5-star army and averting the disaster of war. Very good, General Caldel. You still have some military power in your hands, don't you? Yang Qindong thought about how he would have to face the Bangra army and the 3 provinces' royal armies, who were provoking him. There would probably be a lot of killing. The security behind him would become even more important. Reporting to King Wunan of Damyang. The guilty general still has 20,000 soldiers. However, They are all foot soldiers and no cavalry. Their combat ability is average. Caldel spoke the truth without any exaggeration. Seeing Caldel's sincerity, Yang Qindong smiled and nodded. 20,000 people, not a small number. This way, you can continue to retain your position as a general. This prince will also leave you with an army to cooperate with you in defending Bangla from the flames of war. Sigh, this place shouldn't be called Bangla. Aren't there a lot of Bengalis here? Let's change the name to Bengal in the future. Are you willing? Originally, he thought that since he was a surrendered general, he would be lucky to be able to keep his life and a small portion of his wealth. Who would have thought that Yang Qindong would trust him so much that he would not deprive him of his military power and even let him guard this place? He was so moved that he immediately knelt on the ground and said, "Thank you Bugnam of Gojosian for your kindness. Thank you Bugnam of Gojosian for your kindness. There's no need to thank me. Just do your job well. Also, you won't be able to stay here permanently in the future. According to Yang Xie's rules, everyone here will have to move out. During this time, you will have to do the statistics, pacify the people, and do the related propaganda work. Where is the commander of the Mabe division, Na Ri Song? Your subordinate is here." Senior Colonel Na Ri Song, who had been standing in the hall, stepped out of the formation. Na Ri Song had originally been the deputy commander of the Mabe division. However, after leaving the Mabe region and fighting with the army, he was finally promoted to commander. But in reality, he should be the commander of the 2nd Division of the Mabe Division because the real commander, Xin Honghai, was still in the Mabe region. "Commander Na Ri, I now officially appoint you as the commander of the 2nd Division of the Mabe Division. I will leave the matters here to you. General Caldel will cooperate with you. What this prince needs is for the public security here to be restored in the shortest time possible. Are there any problems?" Yang Qindong smiled as he looked at the old man who had followed him for many years. "Your subordinate will not disappoint the 6th young master," Na Ri Song said in a clear voice. This was truly his first time leading an army alone. Before, he had been following the main forces of the 5-star army. Even though he had military merits, it was not as satisfying as leading an army by himself. Now that he had the chance, he would definitely perform well. At the beginning of 1467 AD, when the new year began, Yang Qindong led the main forces of the 5-star army out of Bengal and headed straight for the neighboring Burma province. At this time in Burma, the so-called invading Gera army had already retreated from the territory of the 3 provincial kings of the southern Ming when they heard that the main forces were coming. They didn't even have the courage to face them and retreated thousands of miles away. In February, Yang Qindong's main forces met up with the Burmese, Laotian, and Vietnamese local armies that had been guarding this place for a long time. Yang Qindong saw Bu Hai, the commander of the 7th Division of the Leng Feng Division. Although the other side only had 2,000 people, the 2,000 Leng Feng Firearms Division soldiers had become the main force. If it wasn't for their existence, the Burmese provincial capital would be in even more danger. Yang Qindong praised these people for their tit-for-tat with the Gera army. He said in public that no matter who it was, if they dared to have ideas about Yang Xie, then they would fight back. Not only that, they would also occupy their homeland. At the same time, he announced that the former Gera, now Bangladesh, had become another province of Yang Xie. The generals were naturally encouraged by Yang Qindong's fearless personality. With the arrival of Yang Qindong's main forces, the Burma War also came to an end. However, the overall war was not over. On the contrary, it was just another beginning. For example, the escaped Gera generals, Rajiv, Azad, and Hak had already escaped to the territory of the 3 provincial kings. These people were going to be punished. There was also the matter of the 3 provincial king, Zhu Huixin, who had previously sent soldiers to Yunnan province. It was time for an explanation. Several years ago, Yang Qindong had entered the Far East through the first city. Then, he had killed his way into Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and now, he had returned to Southeast Asia. In this period of time, he had occupied more than twice the territory of Yangtze, subduing and conquering dozens of small and large countries. From the current map, other than the Yusang region, which was still in battle, the other regions had all fallen into Yangtze's hands. Whether it was Baiming or Nanming, they were all like meat stuffing in a steamed bun. Dealing with the problem of Nanming and Baiming was also on the agenda. Once they were dealt with, all of Asia would belong to Yangtze. He was getting closer and closer to conquering the entire world and allowing the Han people to stand at the peak. It's time. With a light sigh, Yang Qindong led his army from Myanmar to Yunnan province. That would be the entrance to the territory of the three provincial kings. The three provincial king, Zhu Huixin, did not look well recently. Originally, Yang Qindong was caught up in the battle with the Khaganate and did not have the energy to deal with him. This should be the time for him to rise. For example, once he conquered Myanmar and Yunnan province, the five-star army would be in a state of chaos. If Yang Qindong divided his forces, there would be a higher chance of him being defeated by the Khaganate alliance. At that time, the massive Yangtze would instantly fall apart. That would be the time for him to rise as the three provincial king. Putting everything else aside, just taking over the territories of Yangtze would be a huge fortune. Just thinking about this made Zhu Huixin extremely excited. This was also the main reason why he dared to send troops to deal with Yang Qindong. However, his wishful thinking was quickly disrupted. When the five-star army destroyed the Khaganate alliance, India, and subdued the Suhi kingdom of Delhi, even the Bangra kingdom was crushed. Finally, it was time for him to face the five-star army head-on. When he heard that Yang Qindong had already arrived at the Beijiang prefecture of Yunnan province with the main force of the five-star army, Zhu Huixin was terrified. He immediately looked for Mo Gui, who had provided him with 5 million taels of silver, and asked him for a plan. Mo Gui had appeared when Yang Qindong was confronting the Khaganate alliance. He had also appeared with 5 million taels of silver, saying that it was a gift from his master. He also said that Bugnam of Gojoseon was now trapped in the war in the west and it was time for them to strike back. After seeing the silver taels and analyzing the situation, especially after seeing that the Gurkha army had already started to attack Myanmar, Zhu Huiyu thought that the opportunity had come. He ordered his subordinate general Wang Zhanjiang to lead 150,000 troops from Liangshan into Yunnan province. He wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to obtain some benefits. The original plan was very smooth. The sudden attack of the three provincial armies had indeed caught the five-star army off guard. They had taken over Liangshan, Qidai, Langzhuang, and other places. However, they had encountered some difficulties when attacking Beijiang prefecture. Relying on his advantage in numbers, Zhu Huixin did not take it seriously. Until the sudden appearance of the Lengfeng division, the battle had fallen into a stalemate. However, it was just a stalemate. According to General Wang Zhanjiang's report, they could not take down Beijiang prefecture, but the five-star army in the prefecture could not do anything to them either. It was clearly a situation where they were evenly matched. However, now that Yang Qindong had appeared near Beijiang prefecture with more than 200,000 troops, they no longer had the advantage in numbers. It was obvious what would happen next. That was the main force, not the third-rate forces of the provincial armies that they had faced before. The soldiers who were qualified to follow Yang Qindong were definitely veterans who had experienced hundreds of battles and could fight against 10 people each. In such a situation, the first thing Zhu Huixin should do was to order Wang Zhanjiang to retreat. However, he still wanted to try his luck and see if the mysterious man's representative, Mo Gui, had any good suggestions. After all, he felt that the master behind this person was very capable and might be able to save him. He came to Mo Gui's courtyard with hope. As soon as he entered, he saw the man standing in front of the pond in the courtyard with his hands behind his back. Needless to say, he was Mo Gui. At this time, looking at Mo Gui's back, the early morning sun shone on him, giving him a very mysterious feeling. This was the feeling that he needed. He would not forget Uncle Ying's instructions when he came, which was to speak less and act mysterious. In short, the more mysterious, the better. Chapter 1556. In order to achieve this goal, Mo Gue had indeed spoken very little ever since he came to the territory of the three provincial kings. In order to keep a low profile, he would reveal some crucial information from time to time. Moreover, they were all extremely confidential information about Yang Xia, some of which couldn't be bought with money. Hence, he was extremely mysterious. Mr. Mo, as soon as he saw Mo Gui's figure, Zhu Huihua somehow felt a lot more confident, and he also became much more confident when he spoke. Yes, Your Highness. Upon hearing the voice, Mo Gui turned around. He was a very ordinary-looking young man who would be forgotten very quickly if he was thrown onto the streets. Seeing that Mo Gui was bowing, Zhu Huihua hurriedly stepped forward and made a gesture of greeting. Mr. Mo, please don't stand on ceremony. Actually, I have something to ask you this time. Oh, Your Highness, you mean that Bugnam of Gojoseon has led the main army to Beijiang Prefecture, right? As usual, Mo Gue said as if he had already guessed the outcome as soon as Zhu Huihua spoke. Zhu Huihua was already used to Mo Gue's foresight. He immediately chuckled and said, "That's right, but what do you think, Mr. Mo?" "Let's talk," Mo Gue said after hesitating for a moment. Then, afraid that the other party wouldn't understand, he said with a smile, "We can't defeat them. The combat power of the five-star army's main force is not something an ordinary army can match. However, if we can negotiate, there will be a chance." Zhu Huihua also agreed with Mo Gui's words. He knew very well what kind of soldiers he had in his hands. They were formed by some young men for the sake of earning money. Many of them had never even seen blood before. It would be impossible for such an army to defeat veterans on the battlefield, not to mention that the five-star army also had the most powerful firearms in the world. On the battlefield, the death rate of recruits was the highest. If the battle was more difficult, the death rate could reach 60% or even higher. This meant that after a battle, 10 recruits might die or be unable to continue fighting due to injuries, leaving only about 4 people left. In the second battle, this ratio would be even lower, and they might lose 1 or 2 people. After 3 to 5 battles, it would be considered good if 1 or 2 of the initial 10 people were left. Only the soldiers who stayed behind could be considered veterans of 100 battles and be called elites. Such a ratio could be found everywhere in the five-star army, especially in the world's first cavalry army and the new army, where more than 90% of the soldiers were elites. What kind of terrifying battle prowess would they possess? One could even imagine it with one's toes. It was normal to lose, but when he heard that there was a chance to negotiate, Zhu Huichun was a little confused. There was a negotiator sent by Yang Xia in Yunnan Manor, but he didn't have the intention to do so before, so he just threw him into the courtyard and didn't bother with him. Why do they want to negotiate now? Mo Gue shook his head when he saw Zhu Huiyun's confused expression. He walked up and whispered something into Zhu Huiyun's ear. When Mo Gui's whisper fell into Zhu Huihua's ears, he could see a clear change in the listener's expression. At that moment, his face was full of shock, as if he had seen a magnitude 10 earthquake. His shock was mixed with fear. "Are you scared? This is your only chance. If you succeed, the benefits will be unimaginable." Mo Gue knew that Zhu Huihua would be shocked and hesitate. When he first heard about the plan from Uncle Ing, he didn't seem any better than Zhu Huihua. But now that he thought about it, it was a good chance to turn the tables. If they succeeded, the impact and significance would be huge. Many people would be happy to see it happen. This. After a long while, Zhu Huihua still couldn't finish his sentence. In the end, Mo Gue said, "Don't say this and that. Other than this, do you think His Highness has a better idea?" This time, His Highness sent troops to Yunnan province first, so he must have angered Bugnam of Gojoseon. "Do you think you will have a good time? But this is what you want." "I believe you." Zhu Huihua wanted to explain. Mo Gue didn't give him a chance to continue, or he didn't think it was necessary. "Us? Your Highness, do you think Bugnam of Gojoseon will listen to you if you explain this to him? You are the king of 3 provinces. If you don't want to do something, no one can force you to do it, right? In the face of such a rhetorical question, Zhu Huili was speechless. Yes, he was the one who gave the order to send troops to Yunnan province. That was an undeniable fact. Based on that fact alone, he wouldn't have a good ending. Sigh. After a long sigh, Zhu Huichen asked, but I don't know how many chances there will be if we do this. Hearing Zhu Huihua's question, Mo Gui finally smiled. It was enough to prove that he had thought it through and was thinking about how to execute it. Mo Gui said confidently, 100%. As long as we follow the plan, he will die. Hearing such confidence, Zhu Huitu finally gritted his teeth and said, since that's the case, let's take a gamble. However, if anything goes wrong, I hope that Mr. Mo will lend a hand. No problem. Seeing that Zhu Huichan had agreed, Mo Gui's face revealed a relieved expression. Perhaps his mission was about to be completed. In a small courtyard in a straight alley of Yunnan East Main Street, 18 men in Chinese tunic suits were sighing as they sat in the courtyard. They all had the same expression, full of worry and worry. They were none other than the group of civil officials who had previously questioned the Five-Star Army's massacre in the Delhi Sultanate. When Yang Qindong heard about this, they became ambassadors and were responsible for negotiating with the kings of the three provinces. They also changed into Yang Xie's formal attire, Chinese tunic suits. The leader of the group was Dong Chuanfu, the vice minister of the Ministry of Ethnic Affairs. With his rank, he could be considered a senior official. He could sit in a bright and spacious office in Rezin City and give out orders. There would naturally be people working for him. Then, he could drink hot tea, take a hot bath that was prepared 24 hours a day, and talk about life. He could enjoy a decent salary and live a happy life with his family. He didn't have to care about the fights outside. But because he didn't keep his mouth shut, he ended up like this. They came to Yunnan Manor. Apart from the pleasant weather, it couldn't compare to Rezin City in any way. When they first came here, they were disgusted by the fact that they had to go to the toilet. Thinking back to when they were in Crimson City, whether it was the office building or the building they lived in, there were toilets, and drains that could be used. But now, in this small courtyard, they had to go to the toilet in the same place. The weather was getting hotter and hotter. Just the smell was unbearable, not to mention the flies flying around. Although it was the same in the past, after enjoying the modern treatment in Rezin City, the feeling of going back to the old life was worse than death. However, they had no choice because it was Yang Qindong's orders in the first place. Besides, he even named them. Hence, none of them could escape. Even though he knew that it would be difficult to complete the task, he still had to come. He was no longer doing it for himself, but for the sake of his entire family. Along the way, they first arrived in Yunnan province, after which they headed north. During this period, they set off from Beijiang Prefecture, which allowed them to see the true appearance of the battlefield. When they saw the corpses and blood all over the ground, as well as the stench that did not dissipate for a long time, this kind of visual experience was far from what was recorded in the books of the sages. This also made them realize how cruel war was. The slightest carelessness could cause them to lose their lives. They wanted to let them know clearly how tough it was for the Five-Star Army to conquer the East and West. They wanted to let them know that perhaps the Five-Star Army had their own reasons for doing what they did in the Delhi Sultanate. Some people said that reading 10,000 books was not as good as traveling 10,000 miles. That scene was actually happening to Dong Chuanfu and the others now. It was only when their thinking changed that they realized their mistake. When they arrived at Yunnan Prefecture, they were thrown into a small courtyard and not allowed to leave. They also realized that the task this time wasn't that easy to complete. If they didn't do it well, they might even lose their lives here. Although the 18 officials were prepared to die before coming here, they were all prepared to die. However, as long as there was a little hope of survival, who wouldn't try their best to grab it? There was a change in their mentality, and they clearly knew that it wouldn't be easy to leave. Everyone was only thinking about one thing, and that was how to complete the negotiation task given to them by Yang Qindong. As for whether they would still be talkative if they survived this time, the 18 of them would probably become very obedient even without being reminded. However, they had to negotiate first, right? Now that they couldn't even see a single person, who were they supposed to negotiate with? How were they supposed to complete the task? How were they supposed to influence their opponents? Of course, there was no such thing as influence. However, they had to see the person in question before they could talk, right? After being thrown into the courtyard for more than 10 days, everyone's temperament gradually became impatient. While they were reflecting on their mistakes, they were also cursing Zhu Huiyun, the prince of the 3 provinces, in their hearts for being disloyal, unfilial, and immoral. They could only curse in their hearts. After coming to Yunnan Prefecture from Qiqian City, they finally understood what it meant to live under someone else's roof, and what it meant to act according to other people's wishes. Especially after seeing the soldiers of the 3 provinces waiting outside the courtyard. They were here to protect their safety, but in fact, weren't they monitoring their every move? If necessary, they might even kill them all. Chapter 1557. At this time, the mentality of Dong Chuanfu and the others had completely changed. They were thinking about 2 things in their hearts. One was whether they would die or not. If the 2 sides didn't come to an agreement and went to war, they would probably become the first batch of martyrs. At this time, they had completely forgotten their identity. They were here to negotiate. Rather than placing their hopes on others, they might as well work hard themselves. The second thing they thought about was the change in their mentality. The 3 provincial kings were truly crazy and wanted to kill them all. They only hoped that the 5-star army could avenge them and kill all of the 3 provincial armies. At this moment, they finally understood the actions of the 5-star army in Bangla. They even thought that the 5-star army didn't kill enough to intimidate the enemy. Otherwise, why would the 3 provincial kings look down on them? No. It should be said that they were ignoring them. Everyone knew how to talk high and mighty. Their words didn't have any substance and wouldn't resonate with others. However, if they were in the same situation, they probably wouldn't say any lies, big words, or empty words. From this, it could be seen that Yang Qindong brought these 18 people with different views on war here. The effect was already evident. As the saying goes, if you don't manage the household, you don't know the cost of firewood and rice. Presumably, if they could survive, their opinions would definitely change if there was a war in the future. It was even possible for them to become staunch supporters of war. From this point alone, Yang Qindong's arrangement was correct. In the future, if someone wanted to talk about the cruelty of war and wanted to use benevolence or universal love to talk about it, they only needed to follow the example. Presumably, those dissenting voices would be completely suppressed. Dong Chuanfu and the others spent every day trembling in fear. They didn't know what would happen in the next second. It was like when the door to the courtyard was suddenly opened and Chen Tian suddenly appeared in front of everyone. They instinctively didn't know what was going on. What did this person want to do? As the most trusted minister of the 3 provincial kings, Chen Tian could definitely be called the #1 civil official. Many times, his opinions could influence Zhu Huihua. Such a busy and important person suddenly appeared in the small courtyard. Dong Chuanfu and the others were only stunned for a moment before they came to their senses and hurriedly stood up and saluted. Logically speaking, with everyone's status, especially Dong Chuanfu, who was already the vice minister of a department, people like him had the opportunity to take charge of a region and become a provincial governor at any time. His status had already far surpassed Zhu Huihua's subordinate Chen Tian, who only had a territory of 3 provinces. However, under the eaves of others, he had no choice but to lower his head. In order to survive and complete the mission, Dong Chuanfu had to learn how to humble himself. So it's Lord Chen. Excuse me for not going out to meet you. Dong Chuanfu stood up to greet Chen Tian. Although he was happy to be able to talk to Chen Tian, on the surface, Dong Chuanfu still had an unhurried appearance. He probably knew that at this time, he was not only representing himself, but also the powerful Yang faction. Ha, Minister Dong is too polite. Hello everyone. Chen Tian smiled and greeted everyone. His face was brimming with sincerity. If they were just a group of negotiators, based on Zhu Huihua's trust, Chen Tian really did not put them in his eyes. However, at this moment, he had no choice but to put on an act. This was closely related to the mission he had accepted. Zhu Huihua had just given him a very important mission. If he wanted to complete this mission, he needed the cooperation of Dong Chuanfu and the others in front of him. Although he did not think that this mission had a chance of success, in order to gain the most trust, he decided to take a gamble and give it a try. Being able to speak eloquently was one of Chen Tian's greatest abilities. With his intention, everyone sat together and began to talk. The topic was led in the direction of the result he wanted. At first, everyone was very happy with Chen Tian's goodwill and even his humble attitude. Some people even began to suppress their pride in their hearts. See, in other people's territory, they still had to curry favor with him. Didn't this mean that Yang Xia was now so powerful that no one could be a match for him? However, as the conversation deepened, Chen Tian changed his way of speaking his thoughts and put forward his request. Everyone was speechless, and the pride that had just risen was suppressed back into the bottom of their hearts. As the leader of the 18 people, Dong Chuanfu was even more furious. He loudly rebuked, "This is simply impossible. We will never agree to this request of yours." That's right. Deputy Director Yan Lianxue, who was second only to Dong Chuanfu among the 18 people, also spoke up. "If there is anything you want to discuss, you can discuss it with us. We are here on behalf of Yang Xie. There are many things that Minister Dong can make the decision on. However, I don't know why you want to see Bugnam of Gojoseon. You also want Bugnam of Gojoseon to personally visit Yunnan Manor. Isn't it said that a gentleman does not stand under a collapsing wall?" Yes, we will never agree to this." For a moment, the 18 envoys actually spoke in unison. Perhaps this was because Chen Tian's request was too excessive, but how could it not be because they all knew that they could not agree to this request, nor did they have the authority to agree to it? What kind of joke was this? Inviting Yang Qindong to enter Yunnan Manor, and not allowing him to bring more than 500 soldiers. Such excessive conditions were probably something that no one in Yang Xia would agree to, right? How could they agree so easily? And even if they did agree, what would it do? Although Dong Chuanfu and the other 18 people were very afraid of death, they were more worried about the safety of their families and clansmen. If because of them, Yang Qindong was in danger and something happened to him. At that time, they were afraid that they and their families would be finished together. Not only that, but their reputations might also go down in history. That was the greatest harm to scholars. Seeing that Dong Chuanfu and the other 18 people were filled with anger, Chen Tian was not angry or anxious. All of this was within his expectations. He did not expect to be able to persuade them with his glib tongue. He came here to deliver the message. Whether it would succeed or not, he did not have much hope. Everyone, don't be anxious. Since it is a negotiation, then of course it is a negotiation. To put it bluntly, we will propose conditions to each other and everyone will discuss it. Like this, as long as Bugnam of Gojoseon is willing to show his sincerity and not bring more than 500 soldiers into Yunnan Manor, then we will recognize his magnanimity. Our 3 provincial kings will not only apologize to Bugnam of Gojoseon for the previous misunderstanding, but also be willing to give up Guangxi, Yunnan, and Gue province. Chen Tian threw out a bomb as soon as he opened his mouth. Hearing this, Dong Chuanfu and the others were stunned. Didn't this mean that as long as Yang Qindong was willing to come personally, the problem of the 3 provinces would be easily solved and this place would become one of Yang Xie's forces? Wasn't this the main purpose of Dong Chuanfu and the others coming here? Taking advantage of this moment of silence, Chen Tian continued to speak. "Everyone, our 3 provincial kings have now shown their sincerity. Next, it is up to Bugnam of Gojoseon. I think this matter should be reported and handed over to the higher-ups to make the final decision. I will wait here for your good news. Goodbye." Chen Tian left. However, no one paid attention to him anymore. Everyone was obviously shocked by his words. Just by showing up, Yang Qindong could make the 3 provinces under Yang Xie's control without shedding any blood. This temptation was so great that Dong Chuanfu and the others could not help but swallow their saliva. It took a while for everyone to react, but Qin Tian was already nowhere to be found. Everyone's gaze fell on Dong Chuanfu. He was the head envoy, and such a big matter had to be decided by him. Although no one said anything, Dong Chuanfu could see through their eyes what they were thinking. Alright, let's report this matter back and let the king make the decision himself. Of course, let's not have any expectations. Dong Chuanfu was not the only one who thought this way. Qin Tian and his master, Zhu Huihua, were the same. They did not think that doing this would make Yang Qindong come. Because of this, after Qin Tian walked out of the diplomatic mission's courtyard, a rumor began to take root and sprout in the 3 provinces. Have you heard? The 3 provincial kings have decided to bow to Bugnam of Gojoseon for the safety of the people in our 3 provinces. They only need Bugnam of Gojoseon to personally come to Yunnan Manor and give him some guarantees, and he will be willing to hand over the military power of the 3 provinces. Oh. That's a good thing. Speaking of which, there's nothing wrong with the 3 provincial kings doing this. After all, they previously attacked Yunnan province and offended Bugnam of Gojoseon. Now, they are probably looking for an opportunity to explain themselves. This is a good thing. Doesn't this mean that the people of our 3 provinces do not need to go through the flames of war to become Yangxia people? I heard that the Han people in Yangxia have a very honorable status. Sigh, that's not necessarily true. Now that the 3 provincial kings have shown their attitude, it's still unknown whether Bugnam of Gojoseon will agree. Have you forgotten? Previously, someone said that the 5-star army first assassinated their king in Bangra, then used cruel methods to burn and kill many cities and people. This was all because Bangra had previously contributed to Yang Xie's Myanmar province. It just so happens that the 3 provincial kings also attacked Yunnan province. Will they use the same methods on the 3 provinces under our feet? These words immediately attracted the attention of others. Someone immediately said, that's not very likely. Bugnam of Gojoseon has deep feelings for the Han people. Bangra is a foreign race. How could they use such methods on us? Chapter 1558. That might not be the case. Who can guess what the people in power want to do? As for the fact that the 3 provinces are all Han, that's true. However, there are so many Han in the world. Even if we die, the other Han will still be around. In a few years, the population will continue to increase, so it doesn't matter if the 3 provinces have us or not. Phew. Doesn't that mean that if Bugnam of Gojoseon doesn't agree to come to Yunnan Manor and accept the allegiance of the 3 provincial kings, then there will be a huge war, and everyone will be in danger? You're smart, brother. That's the truth, so let's pray that Bugnam of Gojoseon will agree. If he doesn't, then it means that he wants to kill us. I will join the army and fight against the 5-star army. No matter how much they have done for the rise of the Han, if they want to kill me and my family, then they are my enemies. I will hand over the 100 jin and fight them to the death. That's right, that's what I think too. I will also mobilize my family to fight them to the end. Similar conversations continued and continued to spread. After Qin Tian received Zhu Huiying's order to deliberately spread these rumors, the news quickly swept across the 3 provinces like a gust of wind. More and more people came to know about it, and various theories and voices emerged one after another. However, from the beginning to the end, none of these conversations mentioned Zhu Huiying's request for Yang Qindong to not bring more than 500 men with him. The people were being deceived, but no one mentioned it. It was a trap in itself. This was also why Mo Gui gave Zhu Huiying the idea. It would be best if the matter was successful. When Yang Qindong brought 500 soldiers into Yunnan Manor, he would be a fish on the chopping board. However, once something happened to Yang Qindong, Yang Xia would be in chaos. At that time, who would have the time to cause trouble for Zhu Huiying? Not only that, it would also be a good opportunity for Zhu Huihua to show off his might and quickly encroach on Yang Xie's territory. If he failed, Zhu Huihua would not lose anything. On the contrary, he would have many more soldiers in his hands, and he would have more power to fight against the 5-star army. Success or failure was a good thing for him. This was also why Zhu Huichun listened to Mo Gui's advice after some hesitation. Although by doing so, he would inevitably offend Yang Qindong, but even if he did not do this, how good would the result be? The rumors were still spreading. Dong Chuanfu and the others in the small courtyard were completely unaware of this. After a discussion, the 18 of them wrote a report and sent it to the telegraphist accompanying them, asking him to pass the news to Bugnam of Gojoseon. With the power of Yang Xie's intelligence department, the news of what happened in Yunnan Manor had already reached Yang Qindong's ears. Then, the report written by the 18 people was sent to the desk. As the messenger, Beta Persei was naturally very familiar with the contents, so the moment he put down the telegram, he said tentatively, "Young master, this is clearly Zhu Huiying's evil intentions. Don't be fooled by him." Beta Persei's words were well-founded. He had been by Yang Qindong's side for many years and understood his master well. He was a master who was not afraid of anything and loved to take risks. If this happened to other masters, Beta Persei would not be worried at all, because no one would take such a risk. However, it was completely different when it came to Yang Qindong. He really had the courage to do something unimaginable. If it was the Yang Xie of the past, with a weak foundation, small territory, and small population, it would be worth taking a risk. However, Yang Xie had already grown into a towering tree. He was even stronger than the Northern Ming Empire and the Southern Ming Empire. Hence, such a risk had completely lost its meaning. "Yes, I know," Yang Qindong smiled and looked at Beta Persei, knowing that this person was saying this for his own good. However, how could he not know that Zhu Huiying was taking a risk? If he went, he might stay there forever and even face the risk of being killed. If he did not go, the Han people of the 3 provinces would inevitably fail and become enemies with him. In this way, regardless of the outcome, the Han people would die. In this way, no matter what, it would not be worth it and he would only be the loser in the end. This was indeed a difficult choice. If he wanted to break out of this situation and obtain the ruling power of the 3 provinces at the lowest price, it seemed that the only feasible way was to take the risk. However, Qin Tian's words alone were not enough. He still needed to continue to expand the matter and use Qin Tian's mouth to make the matter a reality. Yang Qindong stood there for a long time without saying a word. Slowly, a plan began to take shape in his mind. In the small courtyard, less than half a day later, they received a personal call from Yang Qindong. After reading the contents of the report, Dong Chuanfu and the other 18 people, in addition to sighing in admiration of their king's boldness, also learned about what had happened outside and the rumors that Qin Tian had spread. "Qin Tian is a despicable person," Yan Lianshui said angrily. "That's right, he is a despicable person. However, in the face of a gentleman like our king, he can only give in. Men, tell the soldiers guarding us that we want to see Qin Tian. We have something important to tell him." At this moment, Dong Chuanfu was full of energy. After receiving Yang Qindong's personal telegram, he had more confidence when he spoke. After the soldiers guarding the courtyard heard Dong Chuanfu's request, they did not dare to delay and immediately reported it to Qin Tian. Qin Tian was also very curious about the 5-star army's decision so quickly. He led a group of soldiers back to the small courtyard and saw Dong Chuanfu and the others who had been waiting there for a long time. "Duke Qin, our king has already replied. He welcomes and is gratified that the 3 provincial kings are willing to submit to our Yang Xie. As for the 3 provincial kings' request to meet my great king in the city, I have also agreed." Dong Chuanfu's voice was not soft. He looked completely different from when they met in the morning. He looked much more energetic. He actually agreed. Qin Tian, who was originally a little absent-minded, was stunned. He originally thought that Bugnam of Gojoseon would definitely point out that this was a conspiracy and reprimand them. As such, they only needed to prepare for the upcoming battle. Then, they would make good use of the newly won people's hearts. There was still a possibility of a battle. However, when Dong Xuanfu said that Yang Qindong had agreed, Chen Tian felt that his brain was not enough to process it. Could he really agree to this? Could it be that he did not know that this was a conspiracy? Could it be that he did not know that once Bugnam of Gojoseon came to Yunnan Manor, it would be equivalent to an eagle being locked in a cage and would not have the chance to spread its wings and soar? Could it be that he did not know that this was a dangerous journey? At this moment, countless thoughts appeared in Chen Tian's mind. He was increasingly unable to understand Yang Qindong's actions. It was not until Dong Xuanfu intentionally coughed that Chen Tian was pulled back to reality from his fantasy. Oh, but I wonder if there are any other conditions? Out of instinct, he asked. Yes, our king does have conditions. Dong Xuanfu nodded. As expected. Chen Tian's heart skipped a beat. He did not believe that Yang Qindong would jump in despite knowing the truth of the matter. He had even thought about what the other party's request would be. It must be to bring more soldiers. For example, the 500 followers would be replaced by 50,000. With the powerful combat strength of the 5-star army, if these 50,000 were all elite troops, it would be very difficult to touch him in Yunnan Manor. Chen Tian already had a judgment in his heart. He was even prepared to reject the other party's request for 50,000 people because it would threaten the safety of the 3 provincial kings. He opened his mouth and said, "But I don't know what the conditions are." "Why don't you tell me?" Chen Tian just wanted to see how Dong Xuanfu and the others would perform. He didn't agree to it, but he wanted to see how Dong Xuanfu and the others would perform. Looking at Chen Tian, Dong Xuanfu did not think too much. Instead, his voice was loud as he said righteously, "Previously, there were some rumors in the city that were unfavorable to our king. I think it must have come from your mouths, so our king cannot believe you. It's coming." Chen Tian thought in his heart. However, he did not stop him. Instead, he wanted to watch Dong Xuanfu continue his performance. He only needed to wait for the other party to finish speaking before he would completely deny it. At this time, Dong Xuanfu was still talking to himself. Who knows if the 3 provincial kings will do anything else? In order to dispel our king's concerns and to make the truth of the matter public, you only need to send out official documents to the people of the 3 provinces. Tell them that the 3 provincial kings intend to submit to our king. Everything will wait until our king enters Yunnan Manor. After ensuring his safety, the authority of the 3 provinces will be handed over. Then, Bugnam of Gojoseon will come here and take over everything. No, that's too much. Chen Tian didn't even pay attention to what Dong Xuanfu was saying and directly denied it. Then, with an angry look, he snorted coldly and said, "This is simply because Wu Nan King doesn't trust my king. If that's the case, is there still a need to negotiate?" Not only were Dong Xuanfu and the 17 members of the diplomatic mission stunned by Chen Tian's words, but even the personal guards behind Chen Tian were stunned. They did not understand how their master's words had anything to do with Dong Xuanfu's request. At this time, Chen Tian also felt that something was wrong. This could be seen from the faces of Dong Xuanfu and the others. Out of the corner of his eyes, he glanced at the bodyguards beside him. When he saw that they were also looking at him in surprise, he knew that this was bad. Obviously, Dong Xuanfu wasn't talking about how many soldiers he would bring into Southern Cloud Manor. He forced a smile and said, "I'm sorry, Minister Dong. I've been busy recently, so I was distracted by other things. I will have to trouble you to say it again." Chapter 1559. Although Dong Xuanfu was puzzled by Chen Tian's behavior, he did not think too much about it and repeated what he had just said. This time, Chen Tian could be said to have heard it very clearly. Because of this, he was very surprised. With just this request, Yang Qindong would bring 500 followers into Yunnan Manor? Was he not worried about his own safety? Puzzled, he repeated his question. "Just this one request?" "Yes. Just this one request, but these notices must be posted all over the streets and alleys of the 3 provinces so that all the people know about this. At that time, my king will come to Yunnan Manor and give the 3 provincial kings a chance to turn over a new leaf. Dong Xuanfu raised his head and said proudly. Look, this was their king. The so-called danger was nothing in his eyes at all. Just this boldness alone was something they could never learn. Okay, no problem. Chen Tian agreed immediately. He just wanted to spread the news and let the people of the 3 provinces know. But what was the use of this? To threaten the people? Ha! At that time, ordinary people did not have any status. Often, when the noblemen and officials said that the country was prosperous and the people were at peace, they were referring to the scholars and the noble families because they were often with the noblemen. In the eyes of the noblemen, if these people were satisfied, then the people of the world would be satisfied. Because of this, Chen Tian really did not know the use of Yang Qindong's request. So what if the people of the 3 provinces were at his beck and call? Could these people turn the world upside down? The result of this meeting was a happy ending. After Chen Tian left, he went to see Zhu Huiyun and told him about Dong Xuanfu and the others, or rather Yang Qindong's request. The 3 provincial kings were very happy to hear it. Ha ha ha, great news, great news. As long as Yang Qindong enters Yunnan Manor, he will be the prey in our eyes. He will not be able to turn the world upside down. At that time, we will be able to use the emperor to order his vassals. No matter how big the territory and how much wealth, it will be ours. Qingong, let's go and settle this matter immediately. In order to prevent any undue delay, this matter has to be done quickly. Also, send someone to keep an eye on Yunnan Manor to prevent this Bugnam of Gojoseon from secretly sending people into the city. Yang Qindong's strength, although Zhu Huitu didn't experience it too much, but looking at the opponents he dealt with, he knew that this person was very powerful. In order to prevent the other party from playing any tricks in the dark, he had to strengthen his control over Southern Cloud Manor, especially in terms of military force. As for public opinion, Zhu Huichen really didn't care. As long as he had money, food, and soldiers, ordinary people would have to look up to him. After getting a positive answer, Chen Tian went to work with a face full of joy. Once Zhu Huichen really became a great emperor, he would have the power to meddle with Yang Xie. His status would inevitably rise, and some of his ambitions would be realized. It was very likely that he would be remembered in history. No one cared about public opinion, but only Yang Qindong was very clear about the importance of public opinion. Yang Qindong had some headaches about Yunnan, Guizhou, and Guangxi. These were the ancestral lands of the Han people. It was impossible to deal with them like dealing with other forces. After taking over these places, he couldn't forcibly move them out. That would be criticized behind his back. Yang Qindong didn't care about what they said about the foreign races, but for the Han people, their position was naturally different. If possible, of course, he would want to solve the problem here in a peaceful way. Thus, Zhu Huichen came up with this move. Although it seemed that this place was abnormally dangerous, but wasn't it an opportunity for him? If he did it well, he could righteously take over the 3 provinces, and the people here wouldn't have any resistance. In this way, the big problem would be solved. Since that was the case, why would he not agree? As for what kind of danger would there be in Yunnan Manor, Yang Qindong, who had Datsang, really didn't care too much. If they wanted to deal with him, those people had to have the ability to do so. Of course, because of Datsang, Yang Qindong was full of confidence, but others didn't know. After learning the details of Yang Qindong's telegram to Dong Xuanfu, Yang Xie was in an uproar. First, it was the 2 commanders of the 2nd and 4th divisions of the Lengfeng army, followed by the 1st Cavalry Army's commander Tian Hu, and the new army's commander Su He. Then, a group of officials in the first city and the people in charge of the provinces and regions also sent telegrams to inquire about this matter. At the same time, they also advised their king not to be impulsive. In this regard, Yang Qindong just smiled and accepted the concern of these people. Then, he did something that made everyone exclaim. A personally written telegram was sent to Qiqian City, establishing his eldest son, Yang Bo, as the prince and establishing his identity as the legitimate heir. On the issue of establishing the successor, there were already many people who had spoken up. After all, Yang Qindong was different from other monarchs. He was a master who always liked to rush to the front line, and danger could be discovered at any time. It was true that Yang Bo was the eldest son, and he was also the son of Queen Hu Yan. No matter how one looked at it, he was the best choice to be the successor. However, without any instructions, anything could happen. As the saying goes, if the name is not correct, the words will not go smoothly. How could the other princes not have a chance to compete? Besides, Yang Xia was really too powerful. With such a huge monster, when Yang Qindong was around, the people in charge would be loyal and wouldn't have any other thoughts. But what if something happened? In the face of such a huge temptation, coupled with the fact that Crimson City was quite far away from many provinces, in a place where the heavens were high and the emperor was far away, it was inevitable that the ambitions in the depths of some people's hearts would be exposed. If that was the case, it was not impossible for the Yang faction to be torn apart. However, if the successor was confirmed, then it would be completely different. At that time, when Yang Qindong wasn't around, everyone would consciously follow the new young master. Regardless of whether they agreed in their hearts, they would have to do so on the surface. If some of them had other ideas and made other moves, Yang Bo would be able to give the order to send out troops to suppress them. Just like before, it would be justifiable. This was the importance of having a legitimate successor. It was because Yang Qindong was still very young, only in his 30s, and his health had always been very good. In addition, he had the protection of the world's most elite forces, the Black Cavalry. That's right, after some people's requests for a successor were not answered, they weren't particularly anxious. And now, Yang Qindong had taken the initiative to write down the document for Yang Bo's succession, and it did indeed let some people put down the worries in their hearts. However, when they thought about Yang Qindong's actions, they couldn't help but worry for the old master. Whether it was Yang Xia or the 5-star army, it was all because of Yang Qindong that they had everything they had now. If something were to happen to this founder, the huge Yang Xia was likely to be torn apart in an instant, just like the death of Genghis Khan in Mongolia. Even if Yang Bo could achieve temporary stability, if he wanted to continue expanding his territory, it would be impossible. For some of the officials who still wanted to see how far the Han people could go, of course, this was not what they wanted. Thus, even though the succession document was sent out everywhere, there were still many officials who sent telegrams to Yang Qindong, asking him not to take the risk and enter Yunnan Manor. Among them, City Lord Yu Qian was the leader. Yu Qian's feelings for the great Ming dynasty were unquestionable, but not many people knew that his loyalty wasn't to any dynasty, but to the Han people. Since Yang Qindong did better than the great Ming dynasty in this aspect, why wouldn't he fully support him? This could be seen from the fact that he called Yang Qindong king and had his son become an official. He also did his best to assist him. Yu Qian thought that even if he couldn't see the day when the Han people unified the world, his son and grandson had to see it and participate in it. But now, just as the hope was getting bigger and bigger, Yang Qindong wanted to take the initiative to take the risk, so how could he let it go? If Yang Qindong hadn't sent a telegram to Yang Wu and Deputy City Lord Luan Shaochen in Crimson City to keep an eye on Yu Qian, he probably would have already boarded a ship and rushed over. Even so, Yu Qian still sent 3 telegrams a day to express his determination and also warned Yang Qindong not to take the risk. The public opinion could be fought for in the future, but he couldn't take the risk and regret it for the rest of his life. Imperial Palace of Crimson City. Yang Bo, who was already 10 years old, had already grown into a handsome young man. Ever since his father left Crimson City 6 years ago, he had not returned. In other words, Yang Bo, who was already 10 years old, had not seen his father for more than 6 years. However, this did not affect the glorious image of Yang Qindong in his heart. Putting aside everything else, in the past 6 years, Yang Qindong had restored the Far Eastern province and taken down Eastern Europe and Central Asia. He had destroyed countless countries and increased the wealth, territory, and population of the Yang Xie. It wouldn't be long before news of a great victory came from the front. When the little young Bo heard this, he felt a sense of pride and glory. From how he saw it, this was why his father was so amazing, and he felt proud to have such a father. With his father as his role model, young Bo did not live a pampered life because of his status as the crown prince. On the contrary, he worked even harder than the children of other families. He studied and learned how to wield his saber, and he had done some research on firearms. As the Empress Mother, Hu Yan naturally gave her full support. Whatever young Bo wanted to learn, the top talents in the entire Crimson City could be his teachers, allowing him to ask any questions he wanted. With great support, young Bo was more opinionated than his peers, and he was also more mature. He had always thought that he had to work hard so that when his father returned to Crimson City, he would be praised by his father. He wanted to enjoy the fatherly love and praise that only children could enjoy. Chapter 1560. But now, a document had spread to every province in Yangtze. He had become a prince and the first in line to inherit the throne. After knowing what this meant from his teacher, Yang Qindong was not only unhappy, but he personally wrote a telegram and sent it to Yang Qindong. The meaning was not complicated. As a son, he missed his father. He wanted to see his father and enjoy the joy that Yang Qindong brought him when he touched his little head. As a son, he didn't want his father to take risks, because his father was his everything. As the son of a king, and a possible king in the future, he understood his father's approach. He wished his father a triumphant return and would wait for his safe return. But if things did not work out, he would take the initiative to start everything and fulfill Yang Qindong's wish to let the Han people stand at the top of the world. This telegram was respectfully sent to Yang Qindong by Beta Persei. After reading the contents of the telegram, Yang Qindong had mixed feelings. He sighed in his heart. His son had finally grown up. She couldn't help but murmur in her heart, Bo, don't worry. Your father won't be in trouble so easily. I will lead you to a higher peak. I will watch you get married and have children. I will watch the day you rule this world. Order, prepare to set off for Yunnan Manor. At this moment, Yang Qindong's face was full of high spirits. He wanted to set an example for his son. He wanted to make everything impossible possible. According to the news, the kings of the 3 provinces had already posted notices, stating that as long as King Wu Nan, Yang Qindong, was willing to condescend to the Southern Cloud Manor, the king of the 3 provinces, Zhu Huixian, would be moved by his sincerity. The 3 provinces might surrender without a fight and become part of Yang Qindong's territory. When the notice was posted, the local people were overjoyed. They had long heard about the treatment of the Han people in Yangtze's territory. Not only did everyone have a grain field, but they were also given houses to live in. Those with skills could also work in factories to earn money. It was said that many people who went there first not only did not have enough food at home but also had meat on the table during the new year. All of this was undoubtedly a fairy-like life for the ordinary people. If it was not because they were too far away or because the village officials and officials at all levels were too strict, they would have fled and sought refuge. Now, they could become a member of Yangtze without moving and enjoy all kinds of good policies. All of the people were naturally overjoyed and looked forward to Bugnam of Gojoseon's appearance in Yunnan Manor. Of course, most of the people did not think that Yang Qindong would be a threat once he entered the territory of the 3 provinces. From their point of view, Bugnam of Gojoseon, who could destroy the Mongolians and the surrounding foreign tribes, moved into Yunnan Manor. It was the same as returning to his own home. How could there be any danger? On the contrary, if Bugnam of Gojoseon did not come, it would mean that he did not want them and their lives would be in danger. In order to survive, they had to work hard to become the 3 provinces' army and fight against the 5-star army on the battlefield. It had to be said that Zhu Huiyu had the upper hand in public opinion this time. He was now using public opinion to threaten Yang Qindong and force him to take the risk to come to Yunnan Manor. Yang Qindong, who knew everything, could not think of a way to solve the problem, so he decided to take the risk this time. Naturally, this risk was very dangerous in the eyes of others, but in Yang Qindong's eyes, it was not a big deal. If he was forced into a corner, he could use the big warehouse. But before he was at the end of his rope, it was better not to expose his bottom line. He would not forget that from all kinds of clues, there was a pair of eyes staring at him in the dark. And before he found the traitor, it was best not to use his trump card. This was equivalent to an additional insurance. If he did not want to use the big warehouse, the 500 people who came this time must be carefully selected. Of course, young heir volunteered himself and insisted on following him. Next was the 2,000 Black Cavalry, the Lin brothers, and the self-proclaimed elite warriors of the world's first cavalry army. However, there were only 500 people to follow. Even if the Black Cavalry had 2,000 people, how could there be anyone else's turn? Out of 2,000 people, only 500 could be brought. With a ratio of 4 to 1, all the Black Cavalry wanted to join. In their hearts, it was all thanks to Yang Qindong that they could have a good life and social status now. Now that their master needed them, of course, they would not shirk their responsibility. Yang Qindong handed this difficult matter to Beta Persei to handle. He believed that this young family servant would do his best to protect his safety. If that was the case, who would he bring along? He must be more nervous than himself. Beta Persei also lived up to Yang Qindong's expectations. After getting the power to choose the soldiers, he called for 2,000 Black Cavalry and held an internal martial arts competition in a small area. The first 500 people could follow. As for the others, if they did not seize the opportunity, then sorry, they could only stay here quietly. In the afternoon, 500 of the most elite Black Cavalry were selected. Beta Persei immediately transferred a batch of firearms to them. Then, under the worried eyes of the 5-star army generals, they went straight from Beijiang Prefecture to Yunnan Prefecture under the banner of Bugnam of Gojoseon. After Yang Qindong arrived at Beijiang Prefecture, Wang Zhanjiang, one of the 3 provincial generals outside the city, retreated with his army. He came on this trip full of confidence. The army of 150,000 looked like they were bound to invade the entire Vietnamese province. In Wang Zhanjiang's mind, he suddenly appeared in Vietnamese province and had the advantage of military strength. Even if he could not conquer the entire Vietnamese province, he could at least occupy half of it. However, he did not expect that Beijiang Prefecture alone would be able to stop him here. With the cooperation of the 1st Division of the Cold Front Division, he did not gain the slightest advantage no matter how hard he tried. He also did not see any hope of attacking the city. Therefore, when Yang Qindong appeared with the main army, he turned around and fled. Wang Zhanjiang's luck was very bad. When he led his troops back to Langsun, he was heavily injured by Cheng Hu of the 1st Division of the Cold Front Division, causing him to flee like a stray dog. On the way back, in order to make himself look less miserable, he even ordered his Kiliarchs to capture many able-bodied men from nearby villages to supplement the army. However, what he did not know was that among the able-bodied men he captured, 2,000 of them were from the 1st Division of the Cold Front Division. One by one, they disguised themselves as ordinary people and were scattered all over the place. Then, they were caught and found by the 3 provinces' army and brought back to the Southern Cloud Mansion in a grand manner. Although these 2,000 men were scattered among the various armies, they were already prepared. As long as Cheng Hu, as the commander, gave the order, they would immediately gather and do more things. The existence of these people was also one of the trump cards that Yang Qindong dared to enter Yunnan Prefecture. Since both sides had reached a temporary truce agreement, Yang Qindong had already set off for Yunnan Prefecture with 500 Black Cavalry. Naturally, they did not encounter any obstacles along the way. Moreover, the armies and officials of the 3 provincial kings would come out to greet them as a sign of friendship. This allowed Yang Qindong and his troops to get closer and closer to Yunnan Prefecture. In Yunnan Prefecture. At this moment, Zhu Huichuan's face was flushed and he was extremely excited. Previously, when he heard Mo Gui's suggestion, he did not think it was feasible. At least, if he was Yang Qindong, he would never take the risk to come to Yunnan Prefecture. Since he had a good chance of winning, why would he take the risk? However, Yang Qindong actually agreed and even appointed his eldest son, Yang Bo, as the prince. This meant that he was ready to break the hatchet and sink the boat. When Zhu Huiqiu thought about how long it would take for Yang Qindong to appear in front of him and even be controlled by him, then he might indirectly control the entire Yang family. His heart began to beat faster and faster, and it didn't slow down. In his excitement, he secretly mobilized the elite forces in his hands to get closer to Yunnan Prefecture. What he needed to do was to wait for Yang Qindong to enter the city and find the right opportunity to control him for his own use. In order to successfully complete this mission, he continuously mobilized the elite forces under him from the provinces and gathered outside Yunnan Prefecture. At the same time, he also sent out a large number of scouts to pay attention to the main forces of the Five-Star Army in the south of Langsun. Once he found out that they were acting strangely, he would use Yang Qindong as an excuse to immediately send troops to attack and take the initiative first. However, from the information he received so far, the main forces of the Five-Star Army were very obedient. They seemed to believe that Yang Qindong could succeed in the peace talks and did not have the slightest intention of moving to the three provinces. This made Zhu Huichun feel relieved, but at the same time, he cursed the stupidity of the Five-Star Army in his heart. 10 days later, when he learned that Yang Qindong and his 500 men were less than 3 days away from Yunnan Prefecture, Zhu Huichun called a group of his confidants to a secret room to discuss and perfect the military plan. Other than his number one think tank, Qin Tian, there were 4 of his generals present. They were General Meng Neng, General Wu Yingtu, General Zhang Jiang, and General Kai Wenju. Over the years, Zhu Huichun had been constantly developing and expanding his strength and had gathered a group of capable people. For example, these 4 generals were one of them. There was also General Luo Guan who guarded Yunnan, General Jiang Wuqing who guarded Guangxi, and General Bai Kun who guarded Guangxi. In the secret room, the 6 of them met and Zhu Huichun took the lead to announce the final plan, which was how to capture Yang Qindong alive and not kill him. Of course, if Yang Qindong died, Yang Xie would fall into chaos. However, for the sake of benefits, Zhu Huichun did not want to see a chaotic Yang Xie. What he wanted was to use them for his own purposes. Even if he could not take over all of Yang Xie's territory, if he could take over a third of it, it would be a land that was much larger than the Great Ming dynasty.